Hey guys, tonight we begin with something soft. Literally soft. So, go ahead and dim the lights. Let your blankets settle around you like you're a passing imperial decree wrapped in silk. Take a slow breath. Maybe unclench your jaw, because apparently even pillow makers in the Han Dynasty didn't get to relax. And they were the ones making the pillows. So, naturally, this is perfect bedtime history. Tonight we float into the world of artisans who were somehow political, somehow dangerous, and somehow always tired. Because if the imperial court in ancient China excelled at anything, it was taking something peaceful, like sleep, and turning it into borderline bureaucratic chaos. Let's sink in. The Han Dynasty liked stability. Or at least, it liked the idea of stability, even while emperors changed sides like a pillow flipped to the cold edge. Every palace workshop was a small political ecosystem, and one of the most surprisingly influential corners was the workshop responsible for crafting the emperor's bedding, especially the pillows. Pillows weren't just pillows. Of course not. That would be too easy. They were symbols. They were medicinal devices. They were conversation pieces. And, in a few painfully inconvenient cases, they were the indirect cause of someone losing their spot in the imperial rotation of favorites. Tragic, but very on-brand. But the pillow makers themselves, these quiet, hunched artisans, lived in a world where a single lumpy corner could ruin an entire family's prospects. Imagine clocking in each morning thinking, if today's stuffing isn't symmetrical, my whole clan might be exiled to farm millet forever. Nothing like occupational pressure to help you sleep. And yet, pillow making remained an elite craft. The best workshops operated almost like well-behaved monasteries. There were strict rules, whispered traditions, and the oldest masters were often missing at least one eyebrow from years of singed mishaps involving heated lacquer. Han luxury was glamorous from a distance but slightly dangerous when touched. We begin with one particular pillow maker whose life drifted through palace politics like loose feathers, Master Rong, a man famous for being both unremarkably average and weirdly important. He is our first sleepy guide. Master Rong was not the chosen one. He wasn't even the chosen apprentice. In fact, he only entered the pillow workshop because his uncle owed someone money, and placement in a palace craft bureau counted as repayment. It wasn't glamorous. It was technical and quiet, ideal for a man with the personality of a warm bowl of rice. He learned quickly, mostly because pillow making was about patience. And he had that. A lot of that. Possibly too much. He was the human embodiment of a polite shrug. But the Han court adored artisans like him. Steady, mostly invisible, and unlikely to start an uprising. So Rong found himself rising, slowly, through seniority. His superiors retired. One died from accidental exposure to certain herbal fumes. Another tripped dramatically over a crate of phoenix-embroidered cushions. Bureaucratic life was perilous. Before long, Rong was promoted. Not because he was brilliant, but because he was surviving. As we drift through this moment, imagine him. Lanky, underfed, always slightly tilted to one side because his spine had molded itself around years of bending over work tables. And in the quiet hours of the palace evening, he would sit alone filling embroidered pillow casings with mixtures of herbs, feathers, and shredded bamboo. And absolutely none of this should have mattered politically. But this is the Han Dynasty, where everything mattered too much. There was an expectation, unspoken but heavy, that the emperor's pillows needed to support more than just a head. They needed to support balance, auspicious energy, proper sleep. If an emperor slept poorly, rumors emerged. Advisors whispered. Eunuchs blame shifted. Someone got demoted for disturbing the heavenly mandate through inadequate bedding. It sounds dramatic, but honestly, that's mild compared to other imperial punishments. So when Emperor Cheng of Han began experiencing insomnia, the palace went into panic mode. Now, Emperor Cheng was known for two things. Being delicate, like if a breeze looked at him wrong he'd need 3 days of rest. Being surrounded by drama, usually involving consorts, factions, or someone's second cousin waving petitions. The last thing he needed was sleep trouble. This is where Master Rong drifted, very unwillingly, into history. The Pillow Bureau was summoned. And by summoned, we mean every pillow maker was marched into a long, echoing hall, where officials wearing layers of robes stared at them like they were suspicious sacks of grain. Someone unrolled a document. Someone else cleared their throat dramatically. The whole performance was designed to make quiet artisans feel like criminals. Rong, being the most senior and the least prone to fainting, was chosen to answer. He bowed too deeply. Everyone winced at the awkwardness. The officials asked if the pillow bureau had changed any materials recently. They had not. Had the stuffing been inadequately purified? Were the herbal mixtures still properly balanced? Yes, unless someone had mismeasured again, but mentioning that would get people fired, so Rong just said, "They are stable." In reality, someone, probably Apprentice 1, who had shaky hands, had dropped an entire handful of lavender dust into a batch meant for the imperial study room. And Chung apparently disliked lavender. He said it made him dream too much of purple clouds and rice fields. Which sounds peaceful, but emperors were complicated. Still, Rong didn't know this yet. The court decided that the pillows needed to be remade immediately. Every one of them. All sleeping pillows. All sitting pillows. All meditation pillows. Even the decorative ones that nobody used but everyone pretended were meaningful. This was an enormous amount of work. The pillow bureau had fewer than 20 artisans. And most of them were introverts with chronic back pain. But orders were orders. Rong oversaw the process with the energy of a tired cloud. He designed new casing patterns. He supervised the repurification of stuffing materials. He blended herbs with slow, careful movements, whispering to his apprentices about posture and breathing, because sometimes he forgot he wasn't teaching meditation. This massive overhaul created quiet ripples in the palace. Eunuchs began watching the pillow bureau closely, not out of interest, but because any unusual activity could be tied to factional politics. Every corner of the court was essentially a web of suspicion, and Rong's bureau was just another node. This attention would later matter. Just not yet. Meanwhile, Emperor Qing tested the new pillows. And he slept half an hour better. That was enough for the palace to declare victory. Rong received a commendation. A small one. More like a polite shrug of appreciation carved into bamboo. Still, it was the highlight of his career so far. But now let's float forward a bit, into the next complication, because the Han court never let anyone enjoy peace longer than necessary. Enter Consort Ban, one of Cheng's most educated, level-headed companions. She was famously calm. So calm, in fact, that some officials mocked her for reading books instead of stirring trouble. She was respected but not always loved. One night, she remarked, quietly to a eunuch, that the emperor's new pillows felt slightly firmer. That was all. A mundane comment. But the eunuch passed this along. And someone else exaggerated it. And by morning, the palace rumor mill had produced something along the lines of, Consort Ban disapproves of new bedding, blames pillow bureau for imperial unrest. Rong had no idea this was happening. He was busy teaching an apprentice the art of even stuffing distribution, which requires the zen-like patience of a soft breeze. Suddenly, he was summoned again. Another formal hall. More robes. More suspicious silence. He was questioned about firmness levels. He tried to explain that firmness depended on stuffing density. Officials asked if stuffing density reflected political symbolism. He said no. They looked unconvinced. And because this is palace politics, one official had a personal grudge against another official who had previously endorsed the pillow bureau, so the whole conversation spiraled into a deeply unproductive argument that somehow involved justifying the existence of sleep. Rong stood there, blinking slowly. By the end of the meeting, the officials decided nothing. They simply told Rong not to change anything else without permission, which was confusing because they had also ordered him to make additional adjustments. Bureaucracy at its finest. This incident placed Rong under uncomfortable scrutiny. Eunuchs began walking through the workshop more often. They inspected herbs. They questioned apprentices. They poked finished pillows with one skeptical finger as though checking for hidden political messages. Rong, to his credit, stayed calm. Mostly because he had no idea how to be anything else. But inside the palace, the pillow issue had quietly become symbolic. The emperor's rest reflected the court's stability. If sleep was disturbed, so was governance. And if governance wavered, someone could seize the opportunity to blame someone else. And so, without meaning to, Rome had become a minor figure in the political landscape, drifting awkwardly among power struggles he did not understand and definitely did not want to participate in. Still, the work continued. And this is where another curve appears, gentle, sleepy, but deeply inconvenient. A new apprentice joined the workshop, little Sue, a bright-eyed teenager with more enthusiasm than skill. He had been assigned because palace records needed to distribute labor evenly across bureaus, and someone mistakenly believed the pillow workshop was a low-pressure environment. That person had clearly never met any imperial artisan. Little Sue had steady hands but an impatient mind. He wanted to innovate, improve efficiency, modernize stuffing ratios. A visionary, a dreamer, which was exactly the kind of person a first-century imperial workshop absolutely did not need. He once suggested redesigning the emperor's medicinal pillow into something more aerodynamic. Whatever that meant, Rome gently guided him back to traditional methods. Not because innovation was bad, but because unpredictability was fatal. But Sue didn't fully understand, and one evening, working alone, he experimented with substituting a small portion of the herbal mixture with a cheaper, stronger-scented alternative. He thought he'd invented a breakthrough. He had not. The scent drifted through the emperor's private chamber. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was different, which, in palace terms, might as well be catastrophic. The emperor slept poorly again. This time, Rome wasn't blamed. But the workshop as a whole was reprimanded. And Sue was nearly dismissed on the spot. Rome took responsibility. He said he had failed to supervise properly. This saved Sue's job but earned Rome another formal warning. He returned to the workshop afterward, sat down, and stared into a pile of feathers like they contained the meaning of life. And yet, strangely, this moment increased his reputation. People noticed his self-sacrifice. Officials respected him more. Even a few eunuchs softened their habitual suspicion when passing by. Sometimes, in the Han Dynasty, political influence sprouted from pure exhaustion. As we drift toward the end of this chapter, imagine the pillow bureau in the quiet hours of the night. Lanterns glowing faintly, artisans stitching slowly, a room full of muted rustles, herb scents, and the occasional frustrated sigh that sounded like it came from someone who had been politely repressed for several decades. Rome sat at his usual table, his posture soft, his expression softer. Outside the palace walls, the capital of Chang'an hummed with night markets and distant chatter. But inside, everything was muffled. Even the politics seemed half asleep. The emperor finally slept well again. The rumor mill calmed, and Rome drifted back into near invisibility, just the way he preferred. But this was only the beginning, because the politics of pillows were far from over. The palace still had factions. Emperors still had fragile comfort needs. And Master Rome still had an apprentice with big ideas and no sense of danger. Chapter 2. The Emperor, the Night Archivist, and the Pillow Mandate. The Pillow Bureau settled back into its usual rhythm, which is to say, quiet, methodical, and faintly anxious. Nothing in the Han court ever stayed peaceful for long, but there were calm phases, sleepy stretches where political storms circled overhead but didn't yet drop rain on the artisans trapped below. Master Rome appreciated these lulls. He lived for them. He breathed them like herbal steam. But this particular lull lasted only 12 days. On the 13th day, trouble drifted in disguised as bureaucracy, which was the most dangerous disguise of all. Early in the morning, a palace clerk arrived carrying a bamboo scroll marked with 3 red knots. Not 1, not 2, but 3. That meant urgent but inexplicably vague, which was the worst administrative category ever invented. The clerk handed it to Rome with the expression of a man who absolutely did not want to be responsible for anything written inside. He bowed, shuffled away, and practically jogged out of the workshop before anyone could ask questions. Rome unrolled the scroll and blinked slowly. The message came from the night archives, a rarely discussed branch of the palace that managed records related to the emperor's sleep schedule, medical charts, and anything deemed sensitive to the mandate of heaven. It was essentially a bureaucratic midnight library filled with insomniac scholars and confused scribes. They wanted the Pillow Bureau to submit detailed reports on every pillow made in the last year. Stuffing contents, measurements, herbal ratios, stuffing density, fabric origin, sewing patterns, embroiderer names, even the approximate emotional state of the artisan at the time of crafting. That last category was left undefined. Rong sighed, long and deep, like a warm gust through bamboo leaves. He had lived through enough palace oddities to know when a request was coming from someone important but unhappy. He gathered his apprentices and explained the situation. They stared back in frozen silence. Apprentice 1, the nervous one who could barely thread a needle without shaking, whispered, "But master, how do we record emotional state? Should we guess?" Rong rubbed the bridge of his nose. "No guessing," he said softly. "We will simply write, focused and calm." For all of them. This was not accurate, but it was safe. Little Sue perked up. "Should we include the new blend formula I invented?" "No," Rong said, "but it was good innovation." "No." Sue deflated like a poorly stuffed armrest. For the next several days, the entire workshop transformed into a makeshift paperwork warehouse. Artisans who had spent their lifetimes perfecting the art of stitching were now hunched over wooden desks, dipping brushes into ink and recording details with the resignation of people who knew sleep was a luxury granted only to emperors. They compiled hundreds of records. Thousands. Every pillow ever crafted, touched, adjusted, or even whispered about. It was exhausting. Even Rong, who could usually withstand administrative storms with monk-like serenity, felt the growing weight of bureaucracy settle into his spine. And then came the second summons. Rong was called to the night archives in person. This was unusual. Artisans rarely entered that shadowy space. It was reserved for officials, astrologers, medical scribes, and the occasional eunuch with insomnia and too much free authority. Rong dressed in his best, but not too nice, robe and made his way through the winding corridors. Lamps flickered in quiet intervals. The palace during the evenings always looked a little unreal, like the shadows were staging a rebellion but politely waiting for permission. At the entrance to the archives, a thin official with ink-stained fingernails greeted him. The man moved like he had been awake for 7 days straight. "I am Archivist Shen," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "You are the Pillow Master?" "Yes," Rong replied, also whispering because Shen's energy demanded it. Shen motioned him inside. The archives were a maze of bamboo shelves stacked with scrolls sorted into categories such as dream omens, imperial nap logs, comfort correlations, and, oddly, unexplained nocturnal activities, which Rong decided not to inquire about. Shen led him to a quiet alcove where several scrolls lay open. These, he said, were the Emperor's recent sleep reports. Emperor Cheng's nightly hours had been, predictably, erratic. Sometimes he slept well, sometimes poorly, sometimes for only 2 hours followed by long contemplative pacing that terrified his attendants. The reports blamed everything from diet to humidity to the alignment of the western stars. Recently, a new note had appeared in the margins, possible influence of bedding variability. Rong's stomach dropped. "Master Rong," Shen murmured, leaning in like a ghost who needed personal space recommendations, "the court is concerned. The Emperor mentioned feeling slightly off balance during dreams. Some believe this relates to pillow firmness." Rong held still, very still, like a stuffed pillow himself. Shen continued, "We must determine whether any recent modifications unintentionally introduced imbalance to the Emperor's qi." This was absurd. Pillows did not control qi. They barely controlled neck pain. But arguing with the Imperial archives was like arguing with rainfall, pointless. Shen asked whether anyone new had been handling qi pillows. Rong considered lying. He considered keeping little Sue completely hidden from history. But honesty, reluctant honesty. "We have a new apprentice," he said. He did make one experimental adjustment. I corrected it. Shen closed his eyes with the agony of a man who now had more paperwork to file. Name? Sue. Just Sue. Yes. This seemed both unsatisfactory and entirely typical. Shen dismissed Rong after extracting as much detail as possible about materials, humidity levels, pillow sunning schedules, and artisan breathing techniques, none of which Rong had ever measured but which Shen firmly wrote down anyway. Back at the workshop, Rong relayed the situation. Sue looked guilty enough to dissolve into rice porridge. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I know, Rong said softly, but you must understand, in the palace, innovation is rarely welcome. Here, we preserve tradition. We don't improve it. Sue nodded with tragic determination, as if vowing to never think creatively again. But the Pillow Bureau's troubles weren't over. A week later, word spread, quietly, through whispers between scribes, that Emperor Cheng's aunt, the formidable and politically sharp Grand Princess Yang, had taken a sudden interest in the pillow issue. This was bad. Very bad. Princess Yang was known for two things. Her influence, which was roughly equivalent to a political earthquake. Her habit of involving herself in matters that did not concern her, and then making them extremely concerning. Apparently, she had visited the emperor one morning and asked why he seemed slightly less radiant than last week. He mentioned dreams again. Not nightmares. Not omens. Just dreams. Vaguely unsettling ones where he floated through hallways that kept rearranging themselves. And she, rather dramatically, decided the Pillow Bureau was at fault. She demanded an audience with the Artisans. This was unprecedented. Even Rong, with decades of quiet service, had never been summoned by a princess before. The meeting took place in a side chamber lined with silk panels and guarded by 4 eunuchs who watched everything with suspiciously wide eyes. Princess Yang sat at a carved table, wearing enough jewelry to rattle slightly every time she breathed. Rong and 2 apprentices bowed so low their foreheads nearly touched the floor. Rise, she commanded, in a voice that suggested she didn't actually care whether they rose or remained permanently glued to the tiles. She questioned them with alarming precision. Why had the emperor's sleep changed? Were they certain no foreign herbs had been introduced? Had any artisan recently interacted with suspicious individuals? Were pillows ever stored near drafts? Near people with colds? Near astrological anomalies? Rong answered politely, calmly, repeatedly. Princess Yang stared at him as though willing him to confess something scandalous. At one point, Sue made the mistake of breathing too audibly. She snapped her gaze toward him and asked whether he was the trembling one who meddled with formulas. Sue turned the color of boiled lotus root. Rong stepped in. I supervised him, he said. His error was corrected before any harm occurred. Princess Yang tapped a jade ring against her table. Twice. A slow, thoughtful rhythm indicating she was deciding whether this explanation was acceptable or whether she needed someone to be exiled for dramatic effect. Finally, she said, "You will create a new set of pillows for His Majesty, under the supervision of the Night Archives. With utmost purity. No deviations." Rong bowed again. This meant long weeks of work. And scrutiny. Enshin. Back at the workshop, the artisans braced themselves. The Night Archives sent 3 scribes to supervise every stage of the pillow making. They arrived with scrolls, ink boxes, and solemn expressions suggesting they believed pillows were sacred artifacts containing the universe's fragile balance. They watched as fabric was cut. They documented every herb weighed. They recorded the number of stitches per inch. One even attempted to count the feathers, which resulted in a small avalanche of fluff and a near emotional collapse. Meanwhile, Sue tried to redeem himself through overwhelming politeness. He spoke softly, walked softly, breathed softly. He handled herbs like they were sleeping babies. He asked Rong for guidance every 2 minutes. Rong, patient as ever, guided him through each step. The new pillows took shape gradually, firmer but not too firm, fragrant but not too fragrant, symmetrical with such obsessiveness that one artisan began seeing imaginary crooked lines in his dreams. Finally, the set was completed. The scribes carried them off with ceremonial reverence, muttering things about chi alignment logs and dream tone equilibrium. The workshop exhaled as one collective organism. Then came the waiting. 2 nights passed. 3, 4. No summons. No reprimands. No scrolls with red knots. Finally, a small message arrived from Archivist Shin. His Majesty slept adequately. Adequately. This was the best possible review. Rong read the message aloud. The artisans celebrated by drinking warm barley tea and sitting in exhausted silence. But the pillow saga wasn't over yet. Because something strange happened shortly after, the emperor called for a new pillow, not for sleeping, not for rituals, but for reading. A reading pillow. A pillow designed to support imperial elbows during long hours spent examining memorials, petitions, and occasionally romantic poetry he pretended not to enjoy. The request was unusual but harmless. Yet it carried political implications. A reading pillow would spend hours beside the emperor during daytime governance. Anyone connected to its creation would technically be in the emperor's line of sight, symbolically closer to power. Court factions noticed this immediately. 2 ministers quietly lobbied to have their preferred artisan oversee it. A eunuch suggested his nephew be assigned instead. Princess Yang wanted Shen to design it for purity. Shen wanted nothing to do with that. And through the palace's messy chain of command, the assignment bounced around until landing directly, inevitably, on Master Rong's desk. He stared at the notice. Another sigh escaped him, this one shaped like a slowly collapsing cloud. The workshop prepared once more. This pillow had to balance luxury with practicality. It needed firmness to support posture, softness to avoid distraction, and symbolic motifs that wouldn't accidentally imply political allegiance. Embroidery was chosen carefully. Nothing too auspicious, nothing too plain. A pair of clouds drifting over mountains. Neutral, peaceful, unlikely to offend anyone except people who disliked mountains. Su stitched the borders with extreme caution, tongue poking out in concentration. When mixed herbs under Rong's supervision, 2 other artisans selected fabric dyed with plant pigments approved by 5 separate bureaus. When it was finished, the reading pillow glowed faintly in lamplight like a serene, fabric-born sigh. It was delivered to the palace. And once again, the workshop waited. The emperor used it. He rested his elbows. He read petitions. He signed documents. He wrote small annotations complaining about certain ministers. And he liked the pillow. A eunuch returned to the workshop with a message. His Majesty thanks the artisans for improving his reading posture. This was the highest praise any pillow maker could reasonably expect. But praise brought attention. Attention brought politics. And politics, inevitably, brought complications that would drift toward Rong and his workshop like a slowly approaching rain cloud. Chapter 3. The soft-spoken scholar who knew too much about sleep. The reading pillow episode seemed, at first, like the end of the court's interest in betting. The emperor was quieter. Princess Yang turned her energy toward some unrelated feud involving ritual music. The night archives returned to their natural state of paperwork-induced melancholy. And the Pillow Bureau enjoyed a few peaceful days of simply making pillows. But quiet never lasted in the Han Palace. Something always drifted in, softly, like a breeze under a door frame. This time, the breeze carried a person. His name was Scholar Liang, and he was one of those individuals who appeared in the palace without warning, without fanfare, and without a clear job description. Later, people would claim they'd heard of him before. Oh yes, they'd say confidently, no one would be sure what, exactly. But for now, he arrived like a wisp, thin, pale, quiet, and observant in a way that made people stand up a little straighter. He was brought to the Pillow Bureau one morning by a eunuch who clearly did not want to be responsible for explaining Liang's purpose. The eunuch simply nodded stiffly, announced that the scholar had authorization, and left before anyone could inquire further. Liang stepped inside, looked around, and smiled faintly. "This is where they're made," he said. Rong, who had been smoothing fabric at his work table, replied with a cautious, "Yes." Liang nodded again. His eyes drifted over each workstation, studying materials, herbs, feathers, patterns, stitching methods, even the posture of the artisans. He observed everything with the soft intensity of someone who lived primarily inside his own thoughts. After a long silence, he said, "I've been reading your records." Rong's stomach tightened. "Which records?" The Pillow Bureau kept many, but none important enough to interest a scholar. Liang clarified, "The night archives sent me your pillow reports. I study sleep." That explained nothing and everything at once. Liang continued, "His Majesty's dreams have taken on a new pattern. More symbolism. Less clarity." Rong blinked slowly. "Dreams are natural." "Yes," Liang said, "but imperial dreams are sometimes advisory, sometimes atmospheric, sometimes political." Su, who had been trying to look invisible behind a stack of feathers, muttered, "Sometimes they're just dreams." Liang turned toward him with a serene expression that somehow felt like being gently evaluated by a spirit. "Indeed," he said, "but the court does not believe in just dreams." That much was undeniably true. Liang spent the next hour wandering the workshop, asking quiet, thoughtful questions. "How often do you air the pillows in sunlight? Do you purify herbs before or after drying? How symmetrical is the stitching pattern? Does the emperor prefer the left or right side of his sleeping pillow?" Rong answered each as best he could. Liang nodded at everything, occasionally jotting notes with an ink brush that looked older than some of the palace corridors. Finally, he said something unexpected. "I would like to observe." Rong frowned. "Observe what?" "Your work," Liang said. "The atmosphere. The artisans." Atmosphere? It was a pillow workshop, not a meditation garden. But Liang insisted, quietly but firmly, that it was necessary. The eunuch supervising his visit gave Rong a discreet gesture that meant, essentially, don't argue with anyone whose robes cost more than your annual salary. And so Liang began spending time in the workshop. He arrived every morning just after sunrise. He selected a quiet spot in the corner. He watched. He watched how Rong inspected fabric. He watched how when stitched. He watched how Su mixed herbs, supervised, always supervised, while trying so hard to be perfectly precise that his eyebrows remained permanently knitted in concentration. Liang rarely interrupted. He simply absorbed. Days passed. And with each passing day, Liang became a part of the workshop rhythm the way a soft draft becomes part of the room's temperature. He asked a question here and there, never judgmental, always curious. He wrote notes constantly, delicate, sweeping calligraphy that made mundane observations look like poetry. One morning, he asked Rong whether the workshop ever crafted dream-directing pillows. Rong paused mid-stitch. "We do not," he said. "Those are ceremonial, mostly symbolic, rare, and only during specific rituals." Liang nibbled thoughtfully on his brush handle. "But they exist." "Yes," Rong said, "but they are not used for sleeping. They are gifts, ritual objects, decorative more than functional." Liang hummed a thoughtful tune that sounded like an old scholar's version of approval. "I would like to see the designs." Rong hesitated. Dream direction pillows weren't secret, but they were rarely requested. Still, refusing a scholar backed by the night archives would be unwise. He retrieved old pattern scrolls. Liang unrolled them with gentle fingers. Symbols danced across the parchment, cloud motifs, moon patterns, cranes, waves, and a few animals so stylized they looked like abstract brushstrokes. Liang studied the imagery with a focus usually reserved for solving cosmic puzzles. "These are fascinating," he murmured. "They frame dreams, you know." "They do nothing," Rong said patiently, "but they make people feel they do." Liang looked at him with a smile that suggested Rong had said something wise without meaning to. The days continued peacefully until the emperor's sleep declined again. This time, the cause had nothing to do with firmness or scent. He was simply overwhelmed by court tensions. Ministers bickered more. The succession remained uncertain. Petitions piled high like small bureaucratic mountains on his writing desk. The emperor was stressed, and stress rarely produces restful sleep. The night archives, predictably, looked for patterns. They found one. Emperor Cheng slept poorly on nights after reading certain memorials. He slept better when he read poetry or listened to zither performances. He slept worse when Princess Yang criticized him. He slept unpredictably after debating with ministers about fiscal policy. And stunningly, he slept best on nights when his reading pillow had been freshly sun-warmed that afternoon. Which led to a new and very unfortunate conclusion. Pillow care correlated with imperial sleep. It didn't cause his sleep. It didn't control his dreams. But it correlated. And correlations in the Han Dynasty were taken much too seriously. The night archives informed Liang. Liang informed the Pillow Bureau. And suddenly, the workshop found itself responsible for maintaining a strict rotation schedule of pillow sunning, herb rebalancing, and fabric smoothing. Rong accepted this with his usual quiet resignation. Wen accepted it with trembling hands. Su accepted it with heroic enthusiasm and promptly began taking notes on sunlight angle and feather mood, which is not a real thing. Liang stayed to supervise. He was gentle. He was soft-spoken. He was respectful. And yet, his presence added a new layer of tension, like a second blanket placed over someone already uncomfortably warm. After all, the artisans couldn't rest. If the emperor slept poorly, they'd be questioned. If he slept well, they'd be praised with the subtle dread that soon they'd be held responsible for maintaining that success. The workshop's relationship with Liang grew into an odd partnership. He brought order. Rong brought stability. Liang's questions deepened. Rong's patience softened them. One afternoon, while Rong and Liang were examining a batch of medicinal herbs, Liang asked a curious question. "Master Rong, how long have you made pillows?" Rong thought. "Since I was 16, he said. "I am 53 now." Liang nodded slowly. "That is a lifetime of supporting other people's rest." Rong shrugged softly. "Someone must do it." Liang's expression turned thoughtful, almost melancholic. "Do you ever think the artisans of the palace carry burdens no one sees?" Rong did not answer immediately. Artisans did carry unseen burdens. But so did scholars, eunuchs, servants, even ministers. The whole palace was a system of quiet obligations. "We carry what we are given," he replied eventually. "That is all." Liang smiled the kind of smile a person makes when they find a truth inside an unassuming sentence. What Rong didn't know, what none of the artisans knew, was that Scholar Liang was not simply researching sleep. He was involved in a delicate political situation that required subtle observation. Certain ministers believed the emperor's mental clarity had diminished recently. Not enough to cause crisis, but enough to stir murmurs. Liang had been tasked with identifying whether this change had roots in health, environment, stress, or manipulation. Pillows, unfortunately, fell under environment. Liang wasn't spying on the workshop. He wasn't investigating wrongdoing. He was simply cross-checking every factor that might influence imperial rest. But the Pillow Bureau didn't know this. They only knew he watched them with calm, unreadable eyes. Still, Liang became fond of the quiet room. He once told Rong, "Your workshop has the best silence in the palace." Rong wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a strange academic observation, but he accepted it graciously. Things shifted again when the emperor issued a surprising request. He wanted a second reading pillow. Not because he disliked the first, he liked it very much, but because he wanted one for use during evening study sessions, which he insisted were a different mental atmosphere requiring a different support palette. No one knew what that meant, including the emperor, but the request stood. And so, the Pillow Bureau was tasked with creating a second reading pillow, slightly different from the first. Not too different, not too similar. Symbolically complementary, but not identical. Rong sighed the sigh of a man who understood that symmetry was both a blessing and a curse. Liang offered to assist in the design process, which meant offering suggestions phrased like philosophical riddles. "The emperor reads poetry at night," Liang said. "Perhaps the embroidery should be something that encourages softness of thought." Rong considered. "Clouds again?" "No," Liang replied. "Clouds drift. Thoughts will drift. We need stability." Maybe stones. Stones, Su repeated, sounding unsure whether stone-themed embroidery was inspiring or depressing. Smooth stones, Liang clarified gently. River stones. Rounded. Soft in imagery. The artisans nodded. This was workable. The second pillow developed gradually. The motif subtly suggested grounded thinking, calm, steady, composed. Liang watched each phase, asking questions but never interfering. When it was finished, it looked serene, peaceful, something an emperor might rest upon while pretending not to be stressed by the politics drowning him daily. The pillow was delivered. The emperor used it, and he slept decently. Not wonderfully, not terribly, just decently. The night archives documented this phenomenon without emotional commentary. But Princess Yang had not forgotten the pillow issue. One evening, she visited Liang in the archives. She asked questions. He answered honestly, which, unfortunately, meant she left believing the pillow bureau held symbolic influence over imperial decision-making through dream alignment, which was not at all what Liang meant. She recommended the bureau be formally evaluated. Liang recommended she not do that. Princess Yang ignored him. And so, the pillow bureau soon received notice. A formal assessment team, 3 officials, a monk, and a feng shui consultant would be visiting. Rong read the notice and closed his eyes for a long time. When trembled, Su panicked. Liang apologized, even though none of it was his fault. The next chapter would bring this evaluation. It would bring more scrutiny, more quiet chaos, more political feathers drifting where they didn't belong. Chapter 4. The Emperor, the Pillow Guild, and the world's flattest political drama. The court of the Western Han was many things. Complicated, quietly exhausting, and under all that silk, jade, ritual bronze, and self-importance, it was surprisingly fragile, much like a pillow. A nice, humble, strangely symbolic pillow. So tonight, we keep drifting through this gentle labyrinth, following the soft trail of the court cushion makers who spent their days weaving comfort for people who almost never felt comfortable. We're still in the reign of Emperor Jing, that soft-spoken man who preferred stability over spectacle, and who constantly looked like he was one poorly timed memorial away from needing a nap. Behind him was still his mother, Empress Dowager Do. And behind her was the pillow-making guild, humming quietly like a warm breathing sound in the background of state policy. Now, you might assume pillow makers would stay safely within the realm of comfort and bedroom accessories. But no. In the Han Dynasty, everyone got drafted into politics somehow. Even the people who stuffed fabric tubes for a living. Let's drift back into the palace workshops again, where scented cotton hung in the air, and apprentices kept up a steady rhythm of stitching while trying not to overhear state secrets, which mostly sounded like, should we tax more salt? And, does the emperor still like the pale blue brocade or should we switch to green? The pillow makers kept to their corner, watching ministers shuffle down corridors with the same dry determination of bureaucratic ghosts. But because the Pillow Guild had risen to such favored status under the Empress Dowager, their craft developed a quiet gravity. Ministers made polite conversation with the head pillow artisan the same way someone might greet a celebrity they didn't recognize but assumed they should. It was cautious, respectful, a little confused. The Pillow Guild didn't abuse this attention, mostly because they were too sleepy to care. They were craftsmen. Their job was slow, meditative. They spent hours smoothing cloth and adjusting stuffing. Drama moved at the pace of a drifting feather. If you wanted court intrigue, you hung around calligraphers. They were surprisingly chaotic. Emperor Jing, meanwhile, wandered through life like a man chronically aware that any sudden noise might bring his mother sweeping in with lecture number 12 on the peaceful ways of Laozi. He disliked excess, disliked strong flavor, disliked any level of enthusiasm above lukewarm. And because the pillow makers produced the least enthusiastic object in the entire palace, he handled them well. But he did have one quiet complaint. Something delicate. Something he never voiced in public, but which everyone knew because the palace had the acoustic privacy of a clay pot. The emperor thought his mother's favored pillows were too stiff. They were stuffed with bamboo shavings because Empress Dowager Do believed luxury led to moral decay. Pillows, in her mind, were not for comfort. They were symbolic reminders that life was hard, discipline was precious, and everyone, including emperors, should keep their neck upright like a proper Taoist reed swaying serenely in the breeze. Meanwhile, Emperor Jing just wanted something soft. Something human. Something that didn't make his ear fall asleep before he did. But he never said this out loud. Mostly because his mother would say, the way of nature does not require softness, and he would have to nod politely until his neck cramped against the very bamboo pillow he was complaining about. So the emperor quietly commissioned his own private pillow maker, one who worked in the back of the workshop, near the bolts of fabric no one touched because they were too fashionable for Empress Dowager Do's taste. It was a secret, a gentle, harmless, domestic secret. Probably one of the least explosive secrets in the history of Chinese imperial politics. Yet somehow it still turned into a miniature political problem. Not a big one. Nothing like rebellions or scandal or princely coups. Just a faint tension, like the mild discomfort right before a sneeze that never happens. Word drifted through the palace like slow incense smoke. And as always in the Han court, word meant a palace made whispering to a eunuch, who mentioned it to a clerk, who murmured it to a stable hand, who blurted it to someone who definitely shouldn't have been listening. And eventually, someone told the Pillow Guild leadership that the emperor quietly preferred, brace yourself, soft pillows. So, not firm, not spiritually upright, just soft. Naturally, this started a quiet panic among the pillow masters. First, because they thought this meant the emperor might not like their craftsmanship. Second, because they worried the Empress Dowager would blame them for leading the Son of Heaven astray with indulgent upholstery. And third, because pillow politics, while incredibly boring, were somehow still politics. So, in secret meetings held in rooms that smelled of flax and muted anxiety, the Pillow Guild debated how to respond. One proposed making a pillow that looked firm but was secretly soft inside. A sort of comfort-based espionage project. Another suggested presenting Empress Dowager Do with a Taoist-approved soft pillow, which mostly meant sewing inspirational lines from the Dayad edging on the cover and hoping she didn't notice the stuffing had been changed. A third, more anxious guild member suggested doing absolutely nothing, pretending they never heard anything, and praying that the emperor never mentioned pillows again. But pillow makers, despite their quiet reputations, were artists, craftsmen, subtle innovators. And nothing motivated an artist more than a patron with both power and chronic neck pain. So they experimented. Slowly, carefully. Softness was rationed like a controlled substance. One handful of silk floss here. One padded layer there. They produced test versions. They whispered about pressure distribution, support angles, airiness. It was perhaps the most methodical research effort in the Han Dynasty that did not involve astronomy. All the while, Emperor Jing kept receiving the stiff bamboo pillows his mother endorsed. And all the while, his private pillow maker slipped him prototypes that felt like tiny clouds disguised under plain cotton covers. And because the emperor was subtle, he didn't make a fuss. He simply slept a little better, woke a little less cranky, and occasionally sat through morning memorials with a calm nod that suggested, yes, tax policy is indeed fascinating, and also my spine does not feel like a wooden plank today. Empress Dowager Do noticed. She didn't know why her son seemed slightly more peaceful, more flexible, more rested. And because the palace was a place where invisible changes were always suspect, she grew curious. A quiet, deeply Taoist kind of curiosity. The dangerous kind. The Empress Dowager, in her serene but alarmingly observant way, summoned the head pillow artisan. This poor man, who had spent his life sewing in straight lines, suddenly found himself face to face with a woman who could change palace politics with a single eyebrow. She asked one question. Is my son sleeping differently? The pillow artisan naturally panicked. Not outwardly, he had enough court training to keep his face still, but internally he went through a full existential collapse. He said something neutral, something vague, something like, Your Majesty, sleep is influenced by many elements. Temperature, fatigue, humidity. the quietness of the palace walls. She stared. He nearly fainted. Finally, she nodded. Slowly, thoughtfully, as if concluding, yes, humidity is suspicious, and dismissed him. After that, the Pillow Guild worked with the anxiety of people who expected consequences, which were mild, of course. This was the Han Dynasty, not a dramatic opera. The Empress Dowager did not storm the pillow workshop. She did not demand confiscation of all soft materials. She simply watched the emperor a little more carefully, and she paid more attention to the way he held his neck while bowing. The emperor's private pillow maker became, unintentionally, one of the most cautious men in the palace. He double-checked every stitch. He wrapped pillows in plain cloth to disguise softness. He delivered them during hours when the dowager was meditating, which was a lot of hours. Luckily for him, and through this quiet cushion diplomacy, an unspoken understanding developed between mother and son. She noticed the change. He knew she noticed, but neither mentioned it, because the Han court survived on mutual silence, especially on topics involving comfort. Meanwhile, Pillow Guild apprentices developed their own internal legend about the soft one, the emperor's mystery pillow that supposedly offered perfect neck support. They whispered about it the way one might whisper about a near-mythical relic. Some claimed it was stuffed with phoenix down. Others insisted it contained rare mountain silk blessed by Taoist monks. The truth, that it was just attentively sewn cotton, was too mundane. But the legend spread anyway, because every workshop needs a rumor to cling to. All this softness, scandal, and sleepy innovation eventually trickled into state policy, though in a hilariously indirect way. Ministers noticed the emperor seemed slightly more content during morning briefings. He interrupted less, stressed less, read more. One minister wrote in his diary something along the lines of, "The emperor's spirit appears harmonious. Perhaps auspicious energies rise." A more honest version would have been, "His pillow improved." Another minister quietly attributed a particularly smooth tax reform meeting to the emperor's refreshed gaze, which was basically a poetic way of saying, he didn't look like he stayed up all night contemplating the misery of existence. The Empress Dowager remained suspicious, but not enough to disrupt the peace. She liked order, predictability, and if her son was calmer, even if for slightly suspicious reasons, she accepted it. After all, a harmonious court was better than one filled with tension. Even she couldn't argue against a little restfulness. Of course, she still believed bamboo pillows were morally correct. She used them until the end of her life. She promoted them to everyone who visited her apartments. She even gifted them to terrified guests, who nodded politely while wondering if this was a test of character. Meanwhile, the Pillow Guild continued to rise in subtle prominence. Not in loud, ceremonial ways, but in the quiet influence that craftsmen sometimes gain when their work reaches the hearts, or necks, of the powerful. They began to receive better workshop space. A slight increase in stipends. More apprentices, which meant slightly fewer hours spent stitching until their hands cramped. A few officials even asked them to craft political pillows, items intended as diplomatic gifts featuring embroidered symbols of harmony, longevity, prosperity, and, in one case, a surprisingly judgmental-looking crane. The Pillow Guild accepted these commissions with modest confusion but steady hands. And through all this, the palace remained calm, predictable, sleepy. The pillow makers lived simple lives fueled by cotton dust and mild existential dread. The emperor slept a little better. The Empress Dowager stayed stern, serene, and suspicious. Ministers enjoyed more agreeable meetings. And the mildest political drama in Han history drifted to a close, cushioned by soft cotton and good intentions. Chapter 5. The Rise of the Court Nap Masters. Let's drift deeper into the palace now, away from the stiff elegance of the main halls and into the quieter, more fragrant spaces where the Pillow Guild worked and, oddly enough, where a new micro-profession began taking shape. Because in the Han Dynasty, even relaxation could turn into bureaucracy if you left it alone long enough. This is the story of the court nap masters. No, that is not an exaggeration. It's not a joke, not a nickname. They genuinely existed. people whose entire jobs revolved around monitoring imperial rest. Only ancient China could turn napping into administration. But their origins, of course, were soft and subtle, blooming in the dark corners of the palace like a polite mushroom. Our tale begins with a single eunuch named Lu Qingshu. Qingshu had one rare talent. He could tell, just by looking at the emperor, whether he had slept well the night before. He didn't need reports, didn't need whispers. He could just look at Emperor Jing's eyelids, register the droop angle, and determine the precise quality of sleep. Other people measured tax revenues. Qingshu measured dark circles. It was a gift he didn't ask for. But palace jobs had a habit of finding you. Lu Qingshu's talent emerged during a particularly dull morning audience when he noticed the emperor blinking more slowly than usual. He mentioned, very gently, that perhaps His Majesty might enjoy slightly dimmer lanterns that day. The emperor blinked again, thought about it, nodded, and as the lanterns were lowered, he looked almost grateful. This single interaction spiraled. One minister wrote afterward, "The emperor's gaze today was softened by shade. A sign of cosmic alignment." It was a sign of, "I got 4 hours of sleep and my pillow fought me." But that memo circulated, others interpreted it as a cosmic omen, and before long Lu Qingshu became the unofficial tracker of the emperor's restful state. He didn't enjoy the attention. He preferred quiet halls, soft footsteps, the comforting whisper of servants folding laundry. But he dutifully observed the emperor each morning, recording details in tiny bamboo slip notes. Eyes at level 3 redness. Movement slow but intentional. Neck rotating with reduced stiffness. Possible pillow upgrade recently. You could almost feel how much he wished he was writing about anything else. The Pillow Guild eventually learned of this man and his quiet profession. At first, they were horrified. The idea that someone might evaluate their work indirectly through facial fatigue was terrifying. Imagine working in the palace and learning someone is charting royal neck angles, like a weather forecast. But after a while, they saw him as an ally, an interpreter of subtle suffering. And because the palace was a place where jobs multiplied like carefully pruned vines, someone had the brilliant administrative idea of formalizing his role. One morning, the emperor signed a document that created the official title, Supervisor of Imperial Repose. If Emperor Jing ever wondered why, he didn't say. Maybe he just assumed it was easier to approve a new department than ask questions. A universal bureaucratic truth, really. Suddenly, Lu Qingshu was no longer alone. The palace recruited 3 more attendants to assist him, and collectively they became known as the court nap masters. Their job was not to supervise naps directly, that would be far too dramatic. Instead, they monitored everything adjacent to rest. Pillow quality, mattress firmness, draft levels, lantern brightness, noise from nearby corridors, the angle of the emperor's recline during brief seated rests, the number of times he sighed, yawned, or stared at the wall with existential exhaustion. They kept logs, charts, calm, neat records of the emperor's restful flow, as they called it. No one knew what restful flow meant. They didn't either, but it sounded official. For a while, these logs became the only palace documents without political tension. Ministers enjoyed reading them because they were basically the ancient equivalent of sleep tracking app summaries. Just incredibly boring and oddly soothing. One noted, His Majesty's breathing achieved optimal steadiness between the 5th and 7th watch of the night. Another said, signs of improved shoulder relaxation observed. These were the least controversial bamboo slips in the entire imperial archive. Meanwhile, the pillow makers were undergoing their own slow renaissance. The gentle scandal of Chapter 4 had not crushed them. Instead, it evolved into something new, something soft, something aspirational. They started innovating again. Softness, of course, was still controversial, but they found loopholes, technicalities. The Empress Dowager could not object to pillows that supported Taoist ideals, even if they were slightly more comfortable, as long as the outer casing remained plain and morally firm. So the Pillow Guild invented what they called the dual-natured cushion, firm enough to appear dignified, soft enough to keep the emperor cooperative during breakfast meetings. It was a political triumph disguised as home decor. The court nap masters were delighted. Their logs suddenly included lines like, "Decrease in morning irritability. Eyelid recovery rate improved. Neck angle suggests neutral alignment achieved." The palace was so calm, so well-balanced, so boringly peaceful that even ministers started sleeping better by proximity. But in any court, boredom never lasts. The Empress Dowager eventually heard that the new Department of Repose existed. She was not angry. That would require too much energy. Instead, she simply stared at the official memo someone presented to her for approval and frowned the way someone might frown at discovering a decorative gourd in the wrong hallway. She asked the question that echoed through the palace for a week. Why does the emperor need help resting? It was an innocent question, but because she was the Empress Dowager, it felt like a philosophical test. Ministers panicked. Eunuchs panicked harder. The Pillow Guild panicked the hardest. Even the court nap masters found themselves sweating softly into their sleeves. Finally, Lu Qingshu himself, shaking like a reed in a river breeze, was summoned. He prepared for disaster. He practiced bowing with precisely the right angle so his neck did not appear tense. He rehearsed lines in his head that sounded harmless and respectful. When the Empress Dowager saw him, she did not scream or scold. She simply waited. Qingshu bowed once, twice, then explained, in the calmest voice he could manage. "The mandate of my department is to observe, not to intrude. Only to ensure that His Majesty's inner harmony aligns with the way. Proper rest is part of natural order." This was the correct answer. The Empress Dowager enjoyed phrases like natural order. She nodded, slowly, with the solemn grace of a woman who could outstare an entire room. "Good," she said at last. "Then observe, but do not pamper." Qingshu bowed again, his spine dissolving into relieved jelly. The court nap masters remained safe, but only by the thinnest silk thread. And so their work continued. Quiet as always. Gentle. Diligent. They didn't interfere. They never touched pillows. They never fluffed anything. They simply watched. Not in a creepy way, more in a vaguely scientific, "Is His Majesty blinking at the correct rate?" way. Their presence had a strange effect on palace workers. Knowing that someone was observing the emperor's sleep quality made everyone calmer, like the entire palace wanted to avoid disturbing him. Servants walked quieter. Eunuchs made fewer sharp turns. Ministers argued less loudly. People spoke in hushed tones near the imperial quarters. The Pillow Guild, for the first time in its existence, became celebrated for its role in maintaining cosmic harmony through ergonomic design. One apprentice even suggested a pillow embroidered with the phrase, "Balance begins with the neck." The guild master quietly vetoed this as too philosophical for bedding. Meanwhile, Emperor Jing remained blissfully unaware of the bureaucracy swirling around his naps. He simply appreciated that mornings felt a little easier. He didn't question it. He didn't need to. He had spent his reign balancing factions, smoothing tensions, and trying to keep the empire steady. A calm night's sleep was the closest thing he had to a luxury. But the true comedy of the era came when ministers started using restfulness metrics as political arguments. One memorial read, "Given the emperor's recent improved repose, the court may now consider a gentle adjustment to the agricultural levy." Another said, "With His Majesty's spirit tranquil this month, we may safely discuss border maintenance funding." The Empress Dowager, of course, thought this was all nonsense. A man's sleep did not determine national policy. His moral clarity did. But she tolerated it as long as no one used phrase like pillow-based governance, which, unfortunately, someone eventually did. In a minor ministerial debate, over horse fodder of all things, an official suggested that the emperor's improved sleep meant he was in the right mindset to resolve supply chain problems. Another minister responded, deadpan, "So we rule the empire by pillows now?" And just like that, the phrase escaped into the wild. Pillow politics. Pillow governance. The soft throne era. The emperor never heard these, thankfully. But the Pillow Guild did, and they collectively pretended not to. They liked existing. They liked keeping their heads attached. They had no interest in becoming symbols of ideological debates. Still, the court nap masters noted the tension and added a new line to their daily logs. General Palace atmosphere, mildly humorous. It was the closest government document in Han history to acknowledge comedy. But peace held. Sleep was achieved. Pillows remained quietly political, but never dangerously so. And the court nap masters, over time, became a normal part of palace life, like candles, bronze bells, or someone reminding ministers not to step on decorative carpets. They faded into the background, fulfilling their gentle mission, to make sure the emperor didn't collapse from exhaustion before lunch. And that was enough. Chapter 6: The Pillow Bureau and the Emperor's Subtle Insomnias. By now, the Pillow Bureau had settled into a rhythm that was simultaneously slow, precise, and mildly terrifying. Their workdays were measured in stitches, herbs, and soft exhalations. Their nights, for those who had them, were punctuated by vague anxiety about the emperor's sleep. Not because he was tyrannical or harsh, but because sleep in the Han court carried political weight. Even mild discomfort in the emperor's neck could ripple outward, creating minor panic among ministers, eunuchs, and anyone responsible for fabrics. The emperor, Emperor Jing, remained remarkably serene most of the time. He had a calm air that suggested he had somehow read the Tao and concluded, yes, this is adequate. But there were nights when subtle insomnia crept in. Not dramatic. Not the kind that demanded medical intervention. Just faint disruptions that made the night archives twitch in small ways. It was during one of these mildly restless periods that Scholar Liang returned to the Pillow Bureau, quietly as ever, to observe and advise. His arrival was greeted with the soft rustle of cotton sheets and threads snapping into careful focus. The apprentices who had grown used to his presence simply bowed and went back to their work. Rong, naturally, remained calm, despite knowing Liang's reputation for noticing the smallest deviation in sleep quality. Liang's first words, as usual, were gentle. The emperor's rest has been irregular. Minor fluctuations, but persistent. Rong nodded slowly. Yes, we've adjusted the herbal blends. Airing schedules. Stitch density. Everything seems within acceptable parameters. Acceptable, Liang said softly, is not the same as optimal. Minor misalignments in the pillow's structure can subtly influence posture and, in turn, dream quality. Su's ears perked up. He had spent the better part of the last week adjusting the internal layers of experimental pillows and documenting feather alignment. The phrase, dream quality, sounded far too dramatic for what they were actually doing. Rong, however, understood the delicate nature of this commentary and chose silence. The discussion soon drifted to the emperor's evening routines. Liang noted patterns in the emperor's reading habits, noting that specific memorials caused light furrowing of the brows, which subtly influenced sleep posture. In response, Rong instructed the apprentices to craft a set of supportive reading pillows, slightly firmer in the center, softer at the edges, and with subtle incline variations to allow the emperor's neck to remain neutral while his eyes scanned the text. Wen, who had been quietly sewing, whispered, "Isn't that extremely precise?" Rong smiled faintly. "Yes, and no one outside the palace will ever know. That is precisely the point." Days passed, and the Pillow Bureau implemented small changes, each more subtle than the last. Herbs were shifted slightly to balance aroma. Feather density was adjusted to fine tolerances. Linen coverings were ironed with a degree of care that approached ritual. The entire process was quiet, almost meditative, though occasionally punctuated by the faint sighs of Su, whose shoulders were perpetually tense from obsessive alignment checking. Scholar Liang observed silently, documenting every nuance. He asked questions that were simultaneously straightforward and confounding. Have you noticed subtle changes in the emperor's sleeping posture after the introduction of these new pillow variants? Is there a difference between his left and right arm placement? Do you think the feathery aroma interacts with the lighting in the chamber to influence dream content? Rong replied to each calmly. Yes, perhaps, possibly. We will monitor. The emperor, for his part, remained blissfully unaware of the degree to which his rest was being optimized. He continued reading poetry at night, reviewing memorials, and occasionally nodding at ministers with his usual calm demeanor. Nothing in his behavior indicated awareness of the pillow experiments or the meticulous logging of his subtle postural shifts. But the night archives, as always, were vigilant. They had noticed a very slight improvement in recorded sleep quality. The emperor woke fewer times at night, his eyelids displayed a more uniform droop angle, and his breathing patterns indicated minor relaxation improvements. To the archivists, these data points were significant. To the Pillow Bureau, they were just another day of carefully adjusting threads and feathers. It was during this period that a minor palace event escalated into quiet panic. A new court official, unfamiliar with the intricacies of pillow protocol, suggested that the emperor's improved demeanor might be attributed to spiritual influence rather than practical comfort. The remark was recorded and circulated quietly. Within days, whispers reached the ears of Princess Yang, who immediately suspected political manipulation. She called for a discreet review of the Pillow Bureau's practices, believing that the alignment of feathers, herbs, and linen could somehow be guiding the emperor's judgment. Rong received the notice with his usual calm acceptance. "We will prepare," he said softly. Su gasped. When shook slightly, preparation consisted of compiling meticulous records of all recent pillow work, measurements, stuffing density, embroidery alignment, and herbal composition. Liang assisted, providing commentary on how each adjustment corresponded to observed sleep improvements. The documentation was extensive, though entirely benign. When the review finally occurred, the emissaries inspected each pillow, scrutinized every layer, and discussed theoretical influences on posture, mood, and dream clarity. After hours of examination, the review team concluded, politely but firmly, that the Pillow Bureau's work was methodical, harmless, and unlikely to be the source of political sway. They left with their scrolls and charts, their mild anxieties temporarily relieved. The Pillow Bureau exhaled collectively. Their relief was quiet and understated, the kind of deep breath only artisans intimately familiar with threads and stuffing can understand. Liang remained calm, noting subtle improvements but refraining from commentary that could be misinterpreted. Su whispered a small prayer to the spirits of clean cotton and even stitching. In the weeks that followed, the emperor's sleep remained steady. He continued to read, to dream, and to govern with his usual composed demeanor. The Pillow Bureau worked quietly, maintaining the subtle balance of firmness, softness, and supportive incline. Herbal blends were rotated on schedule, fabrics aired, and stitching monitored. No one outside the workshop noticed, except for minor comments in the night archives logs, which recorded subtle shifts in breathing patterns, eyelid droop, and dream content consistency. The court nap masters remained vigilant. Their presence ensured that any minor disruption in sleep quality was observed, documented, and, if possible, addressed with minimal intervention. Their work was a quiet echo of the Pillow Bureau's meticulous craftsmanship, an overlay of gentle supervision that maintained the fragile equilibrium of the emperor's rest. Lu Qingshu continued to record observations in tiny bamboo slips, noting, for example, that the emperor's right shoulder displayed less tension than 3 days prior, likely due to subtle improvements in pillow firmness distribution. One day, the emperor requested a new pillow variant, not for sleeping, not for reading, but for reclining during brief periods of meditation. This pillow was to be a hybrid, firm enough to support posture, soft enough to encourage relaxation, and visually neutral so as not to disturb the aesthetic sensibilities of the chamber. Rong and his apprentices designed it with careful precision, while Liang provided subtle guidance on potential influences on posture and breathing patterns. The creation of this pillow was uneventful, quietly methodical, and upon delivery, successfully integrated into the emperor's routines without incident. The Pillow Bureau, Scholar Liang, and the court nap masters had, through patience, observation, and attention to the smallest details, created a stable environment for imperial rest. Their influence, though entirely indirect and non-political in intent, quietly shaped the emperor's daily experience. He remained calm, ministers noted improvements in his composure, and the palace itself enjoyed an unusual period of unremarkable peace. It was, in every way, an ideal outcome for those who preferred quiet over drama, precision over spectacle, and steady sleep over restless nights. Yet even in such tranquility, palace life retained a gentle undercurrent of unpredictability. Minor anxieties persisted. A new apprentice might misalign stitching, a batch of herbs could age unevenly, or an unusual draft might disrupt the subtle equilibrium of a pillow. These were never crises, merely faint ripples of concern that required patient correction. The Pillow Bureau, accustomed to such micro-challenges, managed them with the calm diligence characteristic of artisans who had long since learned that their work was both delicate and enduring. Scholar Liang remained a steady presence, documenting, observing, and advising, his gentle inquiries maintaining a continuous feedback loop between craft and effect. Lu Qingshu and the court nap masters continued to monitor sleep, recording data that would never influence policy but nonetheless provided a meticulous record of comfort and rest. Together, the craftsmen, scholar, and attendants created a quiet system that maintained the emperor's well-being, the palace's stability, and the subtle harmony of daily life. It was not a dramatic story. No battles were fought. No ministers were exiled. No rebellions erupted. There were no remarkable displays of heroism or cruelty. It was, in fact, profoundly ordinary, and yet profoundly important in its own way. For the emperor, a well-rested mind enabled clearer judgment. For the palace, stable routines prevented minor anxieties from swelling into undue tension. And for the Pillow Bureau, each stitch, each layer of fluff, and each carefully balanced herb represented a quiet triumph of patience, craft, and gentle observation. As the weeks turned into months, the Pillow Bureau settled into this rhythm. They worked with subtlety, guided by the quiet oversight of Scholar Liang and the precise vigilance of the court nap masters. They documented carefully, adjusted methodically, and maintained an almost imperceptible influence on the quality of imperial sleep. It was a minor, gentle form of governance, a soft, quiet power exercised through craft, observation, and care. The emperor continued to sleep, to dream, and to govern. The palace remained calm, punctuated only by the faint rustle of fabric, the occasional whisper of feathers, and the subtle diligence of those whose work ensured that even a ruler could rest. And so, the Pillow Bureau's role, once unremarkable, became quietly central to the subtle machinery of court life. Their story is not one of high drama or sweeping political change, but of steady influence, of care executed with precision, and of the gentle, sometimes invisible ways in which comfort can shape the world around us. Chapter 7: The Secret Pillow Protocols and the Emperor's Restless Ministers. The Han Palace, as we have gently floated through, was a place where even minor adjustments in comfort could ripple outward, creating faint but measurable changes in behavior. The Pillow Bureau, Scholar Liang, and the court nap masters had developed a delicate ecosystem of influence, built entirely on quiet observation and meticulous craftsmanship. But palace life, like the fabric they worked with, was never perfectly smooth. A wrinkle could appear unexpectedly, and sometimes even a minor disturbance created a cascade of subtle misalignments. This is the story of how secret pillow protocols became a quiet instrument of palace equilibrium, and occasionally, mild anxiety among those responsible for keeping track. It began with a simple memorandum from the night archives. The message was brief, formal, and intended to be unremarkable. Document all pillow variants and associated effects on imperial rest. Straightforward enough. But the Pillow Bureau, ever attentive, interpreted it as a reminder of their invisible influence. They were already cataloging herbs, stitching patterns, fluff density, and air circulation. Now, they added rest impact notes, detailing which combinations correlated with minor improvements in the emperor's posture, eyelid alignment, or breathing patterns. Scholar Liang naturally expanded this effort. He requested subtle notes on the difference between left side and right side pillow support, influence of ambient temperature on perceived softness, whether moonlight cast on silk coverings affected dream clarity, minor differences in aroma intensity after sun exposure. These records became known quietly as the secret pillow protocols. They were stored in the back of the night archives, away from ministerial scrutiny, accessible only to Liang, the pillow bureau, and a few trusted attendants. The protocols were not political. They were practical, observational, and entirely focused on creating conditions conducive to the emperor's calm and restorative rest. Yet in the Han Palace, anything that involved subtle cause and effect analysis could eventually be misconstrued as political strategy. And, of course, it was misconstrued. A mid-level official, unfamiliar with the exact purpose of the protocols, caught a glimpse of one bamboo slip and whispered to a colleague, "Someone is manipulating the emperor's dreams. See here, left side support effects posture." The colleague nodded gravely, although neither understood the precise meaning. They interpreted it as subtle court intrigue, as if the pillow bureau were guiding imperial decisions through strategically engineered rest. The rumor drifted, slowly, through the palace like the faint scent of herbal stuffing, reaching ministers, eunuchs, and eventually, Princess Yang. She was not alarmed exactly, but she was intrigued enough to quietly inquire about the bureau's activities. Rong, the head pillow artisan, was informed discreetly that a review might occur. He sighed softly. Soft sighs, in the pillow bureau, carried considerable emotional weight. Wen and Su shared a faint, mutual look of dread. Scholar Liang, unruffled, simply nodded. Meticulous observation often preceded curiosity. And curiosity, in the Han Palace, often became a form of pressure. The review, when it arrived, was gentle. A delegation consisting of 2 minor ministers, a palace scribe, and a feng shui consultant arrived at the pillow bureau. They examined pillows, inspected stuffing layers, questioned stitching density, and asked about herbal composition. Rong, calm as ever, demonstrated techniques and explained methodology in precise, unflustered language. Liang provided notes on documented effects, emphasizing the empirical nature of their work and the lack of any political intent. The review team departed, leaving behind faintly impressed scribes and a handful of slightly anxious apprentices. The result was the quietest official acknowledgement the Pillow Bureau ever received. A scroll stating that their methods were sound, non-political, and beneficial to imperial comfort. Everyone exhaled softly, appreciating the calm. But life in the Han Palace never truly settled. Even a stable routine could be disturbed by minor fluctuations in human temperament. Ministers, who had grown accustomed to slightly more relaxed imperial moods thanks to optimized sleep, occasionally misread restful behavior as strategic calculation. They began consulting the night archives more frequently, subtly trying to correlate pillow placement, herbal blends, and feather density with policy outcomes. The Pillow Bureau found this mildly absurd, but did not object. After all, the emperor's sleep was still improved, and ministers' curiosity posed no real threat. Meanwhile, the court nap masters continued their quiet observations. Lu Qingshu and his colleagues meticulously documented the emperor's nightly repose, noting variations in posture, eyelid droop, breathing cadence, and minor movements. Any deviation from the baseline, no matter how subtle, was recorded. Minor disturbances were gently corrected, often through adjustments to pillow angle or placement of supportive layers. Their logs, though detailed, remained entirely non-political. The data were not interpreted as instructions for governance, though, predictably, some ministers assumed otherwise. One particularly memorable week involved a minor shift in pillow placement that caused a small ripple of curiosity. A pillow intended for reading was rotated slightly to the left, resulting in what the court nap masters described as minor asymmetry in right shoulder alignment. Liang noted it, Su adjusted stuffing density, Rong oversaw fine corrections, and when monitored fabric tension. The emperor, unaware, slept slightly better that night. Ministers, noting improved mood and clarity in morning audiences, began speculating quietly about the implications for policy. The Pillow Bureau sighed, metaphorically and literally, and resumed their work, comforted by the emperor's calm demeanor. Amid these subtle adjustments, the secret pillow protocols became increasingly sophisticated. They included documentation of pillow rotation angles for optimal shoulder alignment, seasonal adjustments in herbal composition to match environmental humidity, stitching density variations to accommodate minor shifts in spinal alignment, layering techniques for soft support that preserved an appearance of firmness. Each entry in the protocols was annotated carefully, with minor corrections tracked meticulously. Liang's calligraphy was gentle, even in critique. The apprentices recorded data without dramatics, and Rong oversaw the entire operation with calm authority. The bureau operated as a quiet ecosystem, designed to maintain equilibrium through skill, patience, and a surprising degree of precision. Yet, palace life ensured minor anxieties persisted. Eunuchs occasionally misaligned a pillow while carrying it. Ministers occasionally noted variations in demeanor and attributed them to imagined influence. Princess Yang continued to murmur about subtle political effects, though she never formally intervened. And the emperor, serenely unaware, continued to sleep, dream, and govern, benefiting from optimized rest without comprehension of the intricate systems surrounding him. The Pillow Bureau's influence, while indirect and entirely non-political, had an undeniable effect on daily palace life. Ministers found the emperor calmer, more patient, and less prone to sudden irritation. Meetings were smoother. Minor disputes resolved without escalation. The overall tone of court interactions improved subtly, though these changes were never formally acknowledged as resulting from the Bureau's work. No one outside the Bureau understood the quiet mechanics of comfort that underpin these improvements. This chapter in the palace's history illustrates the curious intersection of craft, observation, and subtle influence. The Pillow Bureau, Scholar Liang, and the court nap masters together maintained a fragile harmony, employing meticulous attention to detail, gentle oversight, and careful documentation. Their work demonstrates that influence need not be overt or political to have effect. Sometimes, a soft pillow, carefully adjusted, can ripple outward, shaping behavior, mood, and minor decision-making across an entire court. The emperor's nights became a measure of palace stability. Minor adjustments, made with calm precision, ensured optimal rest. The secret pillow protocols remained confidential, safeguarding both method and influence from misinterpretation. The court nap masters continued their careful logs, the Pillow Bureau crafted and adjusted with subtle expertise, and Scholar Liang oversaw and documented each nuance with serene patience. Over time, the subtle influence of the Pillow Bureau created an almost imperceptible form of governance. Policies were not dictated by pillows, of course, but by a combination of well-rested judgment, calm demeanor, and minor improvements in patience and focus resulting from optimal sleep. The empire, quietly and gently, benefited from the unrecognized expertise of craftsmen, attendants, and scholars devoted to the soft art of rest. No dramatic upheavals occurred. No overt confrontations. The Empress Dowager remained stern and attentive, the ministers engaged in their bureaucratic duties, and the emperor maintained calm authority. Yet, within this calm, the Pillow Bureau operated as a hidden stabilizing force, quietly ensuring that subtle discomforts did not ripple outward to disturb palace equilibrium. The secret pillow protocols became an enduring legacy of quiet influence, a testament to the power of attention to detail, gentle observation, and the understated importance of comfort. And in the shadow of empire, the emperor slept, dreamed, and governed with a steadier hand, all thanks to the invisible, meticulous work of those who understood that even the softest pillow could carry immense responsibility. Chapter 8: Imperial Rest, Pillow Politics, and the Curious Case of the Jade Neck Roll. Even in a court as meticulous and gently paced as the Han Dynasty, there were always innovations, or as palace insiders called them, experiments in comfort. And no innovation in comfort carried quite the same mix of intrigue and mild panic as the Jade Neck Roll. The Jade Neck Roll was not a pillow, not in the conventional sense. It was a small, cylindrical object, carefully carved from smooth, cool jade, intended to provide targeted support to the emperor's neck during brief periods of meditation or after reading dense memorials. To the uninitiated, it looked like a decorative trinket. To the Pillow Bureau and court nap masters, represented a minor expansion of their domain, an object whose placement, angle, and rotation could subtly influence posture, spinal alignment, and, apparently, mood. Rong, head pillow artisan, was initially hesitant. Jade was unyielding. Unlike soft cotton or feathery stuffing, it could not conform. Any misplacement could lead to mild discomfort, an unacceptable outcome in the Bureau's philosophy of gentle influence. He spent hours experimenting with cloth padding, fabric wraps, and slight inclines to ensure the neck roll remained supportive yet minimally intrusive. Sue and when assisted, their fingers tracing lines in cotton and silk, subtly shaping the interface between hard stone and delicate skin. Scholar Liang observed the trials with his usual calm. He meticulously recorded angles, rotations, and results, noting minor shifts in the emperor's resting posture during meditation. Even slight changes in cervical alignment, he remarked quietly, can influence ocular focus and micromuscle tension, which may affect mental clarity. To the untrained ear, it sounded almost absurd. To the Pillow Bureau, it was common sense. The jade neck roll, after weeks of gentle adjustment, was finally presented to the emperor. He received it with characteristic serenity, slightly amused but indifferent to the fuss surrounding its creation. The initial trial involved placing the neck roll under a plain silk cover and letting the emperor rest briefly during a short reading session. Results were mildly encouraging. The emperor's head rested more steadily. Shoulder tension decreased slightly. His gaze appeared calmer and more measured when he resumed reading. Minor adjustments to posture, imperceptible to anyone but the careful observers of the court nap masters, yielded subtle improvements in comfort and focus. The Empress Dowager eventually noticed the object. She did not oppose its use. After all, it was small, unobtrusive, and morally neutral. But she did inquire about its purpose, which prompted Rong to give the most neutral, careful explanation possible. It is a minor support, Your Majesty, designed to aid the Emperor's alignment during meditation, ensuring harmony of posture and spirit. She nodded slowly, perhaps suspicious but ultimately unconcerned. The jade neck roll remained in use, monitored and adjusted as necessary. The Pillow Bureau recorded every minor deviation, logged adjustments, and ensured that each session contributed to a continuous baseline of comfort. Ministers who often observed the emperor after brief meditation periods noted improvements in mood and composure, attributing these shifts, quietly, of course, to the serene influence of study, reflection, or the philosophical atmosphere. None of them suspected that a small, cylindrical piece of jade, carefully wrapped in silk, was a critical component of the emperor's minor but measurable improvements in posture and calm demeanor. Of course, palace rumors spread. Some whispered that the jade neck roll had mystical properties, that it could harmonize chi or align cosmic energies. Others speculated, with mild concern, that it was a device of political manipulation, crafted to subtly influence imperial decisions. The Pillow Bureau silently recorded these rumors, noting their occasional correlation with anxiety levels in certain ministers, but otherwise paid them no mind. The jade neck roll remained an object of functional artistry, not intrigue. Meanwhile, the Pillow Bureau continued to refine its craft. They experimented with layering silk and cotton in subtle configurations to complement the jade neck roll, enhancing the gentle curvature of support and ensuring minimal discomfort. Herb sachets were rotated according to seasonal humidity to maintain gentle aromatherapy benefits. Minor changes in room temperature and lighting were recorded, alongside slight adjustments to the emperor's reclining angle. The court nap masters meticulously documented each session. Lu Qingshu noted subtle shifts in eyelid droop, breathing patterns, and shoulder alignment. He recorded slight differences in repose depending on the angle of the jade neck roll and correlated these with the emperor's calm behavior during morning audiences. Each observation was logged in bamboo slips, contributing to an ever-growing archive of empirical data regarding imperial rest. Despite the mild scandal implied by rumors, the emperor's sleep, meditation, and reading habits remained serene. The Pillow Bureau had, through patient observation and quiet innovation, transformed a minor support tool into a stable element of palace life. No political upheaval occurred. No minister was exiled. Even Princess Yang, who had previously expressed concern about potential manipulation, was satisfied that the jade neck roll remained unobtrusive and harmless. One minor, amusing incident occurred when an overzealous apprentice attempted to adjust the neck roll without consultation. The emperor, noticing a slight misalignment, shifted it himself with delicate precision. Rome quietly reminded the apprentice of protocol, and the court napmasters recorded the incident as a minor correction in their logs, noting no observable disruption in rest quality. The apprentice's embarrassment remained internal, a faint whisper of anxiety quickly smoothed away by routine. It is worth noting, in the context of palace life, how extraordinary this mild attention to detail was. A single cylindrical object of jade, when combined with subtle support techniques, meticulous stitching, and careful observation, became a linchpin in a quiet system designed to maintain harmony, patience, and calm judgment throughout the court. The emperor, unaware of the layers of effort and observation surrounding his rest, continued to govern with the serene clarity for which he was known. Even minor adjustments in pillow firmness or the placement of the jade neck roll could influence micro aspects of behavior. Slight improvements in focus, reduction in minor irritability, and steadier posture during long audiences. While ministers speculated about external causes, the true mechanism of influence remained almost entirely invisible, accessible only to the pillow bureau, scholar Liang, and the court napmasters. Over time, the jade neck roll became emblematic of a subtle philosophy. Comfort, carefully observed and precisely implemented, could shape human behavior in the quietest and most unobtrusive ways. It was not coercive. It was not manipulative. It was merely gentle, patient, and highly attentive to small but meaningful details. The Pillow Bureau's success with the jade neck roll encouraged further exploration. They experimented with variations in material density, cloth wrapping, and subtle curvature to refine support. They tracked long-term effects on posture, mood, and minor physical indicators such as eyelid droop, shoulder alignment, and breathing steadiness. These observations contributed to an evolving archive of data regarding the nuanced interplay of rest, comfort, and minor behavioral effects. The court napmasters, maintaining vigilance over all aspects of the emperor's rest, documented outcomes systematically. Lu Qingshu and his colleagues remained unobtrusive, careful, and entirely committed to the serene equilibrium of the palace. Their logs, combined with the Pillow Bureau's detailed observations, represented one of the quietest but most precise systems of minor influence in Han history. It is tempting to assume that the work of the Pillow Bureau, the court napmasters, and scholar Liang was trivial or ceremonial. It was neither. The emperor's calm demeanor, improved patience, and measured decision-making, all subtle and almost imperceptible, were influenced by these quiet interventions. Yet there was no drama, no crisis, and no overt political conflict. The influence was invisible, gentle, and entirely functional. Through this lens, the jade neck roll represents more than an object of comfort. It symbolizes the Han Palace's capacity to translate patient observation, meticulous craftsmanship, and gentle oversight into subtle forms of influence. The emperor, unaware of the precise mechanics, benefited indirectly. Ministers, unaware of the system, speculated endlessly. And the Pillow Bureau, scholars, and attendants maintained their delicate equilibrium, quietly orchestrating harmony with soft hands, patient minds, and precisely layered materials. Even as months passed, the jade neck roll remained central to the subtle mechanics of comfort and calm. It was rotated, adjusted, and complemented by carefully crafted pillows and supportive fabric layers. Minor environmental adjustments, humidity, temperature, lighting, were recorded, implemented, and logged. Herbal sachets continued to rotate seasonally, ensuring gentle olfactory balance. And the emperor, serene as ever, continued to govern with clarity, patience, and an almost imperceptible sense of well-being. In the quiet, deliberate world of the Pillow Bureau, the court napmasters, and scholar Liang, the jade neck roll epitomized the principle that small, gentle interventions, carefully observed and meticulously applied, could yield subtle but meaningful improvements in human experience. No conflicts erupted. No dramatic power struggles occurred. The Empress Dowager observed without incident. Ministers speculated in whispers. Princess Yang remained mildly curious but ultimately undisturbed. The emperor slept, read, and meditated with steady calm. And the pillow bureau, quietly and persistently, maintained the invisible systems that allowed all of this to function seamlessly. Chapter 9. The Gentle Rivalries of Pillow Artisans. By this point in the palace narrative, we begin to notice a curious phenomenon. The pillow bureau, while entirely focused on subtlety, comfort, and imperial rest, had developed internal dynamics that were almost competitive. Not in a dramatic shouting match sense, but in a slow, quiet, intensely pedantic way that could occupy months of careful labor. The artisans, Rong, Su, Wen, and a rotating set of apprentices were, as we've seen, calm, meticulous, and exceedingly patient. Yet even among such diligent craftsmen, minor rivalries emerged. These were rarely voiced aloud. They manifested instead in the delicate shifting of feather density, the precision of silk folding, or the subtle differences in herbal blending. Rong, naturally, had seniority. He oversaw the bureau and maintained final authority over any construction or adjustment. But Su and Wen were equally talented in their respective areas. Su excelled in microalignments of stuffing, ensuring that pillows supported subtle spinal curves, Wen specialized in layering cloth for firmness and softness simultaneously. Both had a keen eye for fine detail and, on occasion, gentle disdain for the other's methodology. The tension was not dramatic. There were no shouting matches. The disputes were expressed through subtle corrections, slight modifications, and the occasional raised eyebrow observed only by Liang. Even the apprentices learned to navigate these microdynamics. Align feathers carefully, but note the preferred density of each artisan. Fold silk precisely, but remember the nuances of Wen's preferred layering sequence. Each day became a quiet negotiation of taste, technique, and subtle ego. Scholar Liang, ever calm, documented these interactions. He noted differences in approach. Rong emphasized uniformity and classical technique, Su valued subtle curvature and alignment, and Wen prioritized adaptability and soft support. Their combined expertise created a bureau more effective than any single artisan could achieve, but the slight rivalries ensured that no pillow was ever quite perfect, at least until it passed all three evaluations. The court nap masters, naturally, were unconcerned with internal artistry. They observed the emperor's rest, not the artisan's personal dynamics. Lu Qingshu occasionally noted that minor variations in pillow design seemed correlated with slightly improved posture or reduced eye tension, but he did not inquire further. To him, whether a layer was slightly softer due to rivalry or preference was irrelevant. What mattered was the emperor's calm and measured repose. Occasionally, an apprentice would attempt to mediate. Should we combine Su's and Wen's methods? They would ask. Rong, usually calm, would consider this carefully. The result was often a hybrid pillow, incorporating the soft curvature of Su with the layered support of Wen. These compromises became quietly celebrated innovations, although the artisans never admitted openly that they had influenced one another. Pride was subtle, satisfaction even more so. Meanwhile, the emperor remained entirely unaware of these delicate rivalries. He benefited from their attention, receiving pillows that, through patient refinement, provided optimal support for meditation, reading, and sleep. Ministers noted improved composure as always, but never attributed it to the intricate dance of competing artisans. The Empress Dowager remained stern but unconcerned. Princess Yang occasionally inquired, but her curiosity rarely extended beyond polite observation. One minor incident highlights the subtlety of these rivalries. Su had prepared a new pillow design, intended to improve neck alignment during reading. When, upon inspection, noted that while the pillow was technically correct, the layering could be adjusted to reduce shoulder strain further. Su, quietly proud, made minor adjustments. Rong, reviewing the final product, requested a slight realignment of stuffing density to balance firmness and softness. The final pillow, after 3 rounds of subtle negotiation, was delivered to the emperor. The outcome was quietly remarkable. Slightly improved comfort led to reduced fidgeting during reading, minimal shoulder tension, and steady eyelid droop patterns. Scholar Liang logged these observations meticulously. Lu Qingshu noted a reduction in minor facial tension during morning audiences. Ministers, once again, attributed the emperor's calm demeanor to philosophical contemplation rather than the hidden work of patient artisans. The rivalry, if it can even be called that, persisted gently over time. Each artisan refined techniques, experimented with layering, and monitored results with patient attention. Apprentices observed the subtle interplay of skill, pride, and careful correction, learning that even in a calm, meticulously organized environment, minor competition could drive excellence without creating conflict. It is important to note that these rivalries, while quiet, contributed significantly to the overall efficacy of the pillow bureau. Each artisan's insistence on perfection, combined with subtle negotiation and compromise, produced pillows, neck rolls, and supportive devices of extraordinary quality. The emperor's rest remained uninterrupted, and the palace benefited from a quiet but profound stabilization of behavior, mood, and minor health indicators. Interestingly, the same dynamic affected herbal composition. Rome preferred minimal aroma, allowing natural cotton and silk scents to dominate. Su experimented with mild jasmine and chrysanthemum blends to reduce subtle tension. When introduced tiny notes of mint during warm months to cool perception. The resulting pillows were neither uniform nor identical, but each reflected a careful balance of individual technique and subtle collaboration. Scholar Liang, ever the meticulous observer, recorded these distinctions. Over time, he developed a detailed classification system for pillow variants, noting correlations between stuffing density, aromatic balance, layering technique, and minor observable effects on the emperor's posture, breathing, and calmness. Lu Qingshu, noting these outcomes in the bamboo slips of the court nap masters, cross-referenced the data, observing minor patterns in eye droop, shoulder alignment, and eyelid recovery during meditation and rest. This gentle rivalry produced an unexpected outcome, a form of quality control that required no formal oversight. Each artisan, aware that their work would be compared and sometimes subtly corrected, maintained extreme diligence. Their pride in technique ensured that the emperor's comfort was never compromised, and their subtle competition drove innovation in pillow design, layering, and herbal integration. The palace, as always, benefited quietly. Ministers, unaware of the precise mechanics behind the emperor's improved calm, continued their duties with slightly reduced tension. Minor conflicts were resolved more smoothly. Discussions, once slightly abrupt, flowed with less friction. The Empress Dowager observed serene audiences without comment. Princess Yang, while occasionally curious, remained non-interventionist. The emperor, entirely unaware of the artisan's internal dynamics, continued to sleep, meditate, and read with steady composure. Even minor errors were managed with gentle efficiency. When an apprentice accidentally rotated a pillow incorrectly, the correction was subtle and unremarkable. Su adjusted stuffing, when layered fabric, Rong oversaw alignment, and Liang recorded observations. Lu Qingshu noted a return to baseline posture and calm behavior. The process, although minor in appearance, ensured continuity of comfort and prevented small disturbances from cascading into broader tension. The Pillow Bureau's internal rivalries, subtle as they were, exemplify the quiet complexities of court life in the Han Dynasty. They demonstrate how meticulous attention to detail, patient negotiation, and careful observation can produce stability, comfort, and minor behavioral improvements without drama or confrontation. The emperor benefited, the palace remained calm, and the artisan's pride drove continuous improvement in subtle, nearly imperceptible ways. And so, as the weeks drifted into months, the Pillow Bureau continued its careful work. Rivalries remained gentle, observation remained meticulous, and the emperor's sleep and posture remained serene. The jade neck roll, supportive pillows, layered fabrics, and herbal infusions all functioned as intended, quietly stabilizing the palace environment and ensuring calm, measured governance. Even within a court designed for precision, hierarchy, and observation, minor human dynamics, gentle rivalries, subtle pride, and patient correction could produce effects more significant than anyone expected. Yet these effects were never loud. They were never dramatic. They were measured, careful, and persistent, an ongoing testament to the understated power of craft, attention, and quiet competition. The pillow bureau, scholar Liang, and the court nap masters had achieved a delicate balance, one in which minor rivalries fueled meticulous craftsmanship, subtle observation ensured effectiveness, and the emperor's calm and well-rested demeanor quietly stabilized palace life. The story, if observed from the outside, would appear uneventful. But within these quiet halls, it was nothing short of extraordinary in its careful orchestration. Chapter 10. The Emperor's Afternoon Repose and the Art of Subtle Observation. As the Han Palace settled into its rhythm of soft routines, measured diligence, and carefully monitored comfort, another minor but persistent element of daily life became significant: the Emperor's afternoon repose. Unlike the night's sleep meticulously tracked by the court nap masters or the carefully calibrated pillows used during reading and meditation, the afternoon rest was a flexible, variable period in which the emperor reclined briefly, sometimes for 15 minutes, sometimes for an hour, depending on the demands of governance and the subtle fluctuations of mood. This period, gentle as it was, presented unique challenges. The emperor's posture could shift unpredictably, ministers might linger near the audience halls, and environmental factors such as lighting, temperature, and airflow could subtly influence comfort. For the pillow bureau and the court nap masters, these hours required attentive observation and quiet intervention, a form of indirect stewardship, ensuring that minor disturbances did not cascade into discomfort, distraction, or fatigue. Rome, ever precise, had developed a series of layered cushions specifically for this purpose. They were neither firm nor soft, but carefully graduated in density, designed to support the emperor's spine and neck while allowing minimal adjustment without disrupting alignment. Su added minor contouring to accommodate natural curvature, ensuring that each segment of the cushion interacted subtly with posture. When layered soft silk over the top, ensuring a calming tactile sensation and minimal sensory friction. Scholar Liang observed the afternoon sessions with characteristic calm. He meticulously recorded each reclining position, noting subtle deviations in shoulder alignment, neck angle, and eyelid droop. Lu Qingshu and the court nap masters documented minute variations in breathing patterns, subtle micro-movements during shifts, and even the minor influence of draft from open windows on eyelid closure and facial tension. The afternoon repose became a minor yet critical period for observation. Unlike night sleep, which was longer and more predictable, these sessions were short, variable, and highly responsive to immediate environmental factors. Small misalignments, an improperly layered silk cover, an uneven feather layer, a slight misplacement of the jade neck roll, could produce noticeable minor tension in the emperor's shoulders or neck. While this tension was trivial in the grand scope of governance, for the meticulous observers it represented a deviation from optimal rest that required careful documentation and, where possible, correction. One mild incident illustrates the subtlety of this system. During a particularly warm spring afternoon, an apprentice misaligned a cushion layer slightly, resulting in a minor tilt in the emperor's reclining posture. Lu Qingshu, observing from a respectful distance, noted the deviation, recording the exact angle and duration of the misalignment. Rome, informed discreetly, adjusted the layer after the session concluded, and Su fine-tuned the contouring. When replaced the silk overlay with one slightly tighter in tension to prevent further microshifts. The emperor, entirely unaware, experienced no discomfort. Morning audiences reflected no change in mood or composure. Yet the documentation ensured that the same minor error would not recur. These careful adjustments reinforced the subtle interplay between observation, intervention, and documentation. The Pillow Bureau maintained a continuous feedback loop, adjustments informed by observation, outcomes logged by the court nap masters, minor corrections implemented with precision, and effects evaluated during subsequent sessions. This system, quiet and largely invisible, ensured that even variable afternoon repose remained a period of consistent comfort. The gentle rituals surrounding these sessions became increasingly formalized. A small attendant monitored ambient temperature, adjusting blinds or curtains as necessary to prevent glare or heat discomfort. A second attendant subtly regulated airflow, ensuring that drafts did not disturb posture or respiratory patterns. Herbal sachets, rotated seasonally, were placed nearby to provide faint olfactory comfort without overpowering the subtlety of tactile and thermal sensations. Each element, while minor in isolation, contributed to an integrated system designed to preserve equilibrium, calm, and restorative repose. Scholar Liang, documenting each element, noted a pattern. When all variables, pillow alignment, layering, jade neck roll placement, ambient temperature, airflow, and gentle aromatics, were controlled within precise tolerances, the emperor's micromovements were minimized, breathing became steady, and minor facial tension indicators decreased. While these observations would not influence public policy, they contributed to a smoother court dynamic, reducing irritability, minimizing minor disputes, and indirectly stabilizing palace proceedings. Even ministers, oblivious to the precise mechanisms at work, noticed improvements. Afternoon audiences following the emperor's brief rest often displayed minor but consistent reductions in abrupt interruptions, sharper attentiveness, and slightly longer periods of patient listening. While they attributed these outcomes to philosophical reading, diet, or general temperament, the real cause remained subtle, meticulous craftsmanship combined with attentive observation, a testament to the quiet power of well-managed comfort. The jade neck roll, previously employed primarily for reading and meditation, was sometimes incorporated into afternoon repose, providing targeted cervical support. Rome carefully monitored its placement, Su adjusted contouring, and when layered supportive silk and cotton. Lu Qingshu and the court nap masters observed the effects, logging minor improvements in neck alignment and respiratory steadiness. These observations, while subtle, contributed to a continuous refinement of the afternoon repose system, creating a remarkably stable microenvironment within the palace. Interestingly, minor rivalries among the pillow bureau artisans continued to play a role. Each artisan subtly emphasized their preferred method for layering, stuffing, and contouring, resulting in slight variations between sessions. These differences, rather than causing disruption, introduced gentle diversity into the system, preventing monotony and encouraging continuous refinement. Scholar Liang documented each iteration, noting that even minor deviations could yield measurable differences in posture, eyelid droop, and shoulder tension, an empirical demonstration of the delicate interplay between craft, observation, and subtle influence. The afternoon repose sessions also highlighted the importance of minor environmental factors. Lighting, while often overlooked, was carefully regulated. Blinds were adjusted to provide gentle, indirect illumination. Candle placement was calculated to minimize glare while preserving warmth, and reflective surfaces were considered for their subtle influence on visual comfort. Temperature, too, was monitored, with soft drafts introduced or prevented based on seasonal norms. Each adjustment, while imperceptible to anyone but trained observers, contributed to a consistent baseline of comfort and calm. In this environment, the emperor's small, deliberate routines, reclining briefly, adjusting the jade neck roll, inhaling faint herbal scents, and resting against carefully aligned pillows, functioned as a stabilizing force within the palace. While invisible to the untrained eye, these moments of micro-rest, supported by patient artisans and attentive observers, allowed the emperor to engage in governance with a steadier, calmer demeanor. Minor irritability was minimized. Subtle tension in shoulders, neck, and eyelids was reduced. Attention during audiences was more sustained. And all of this occurred without drama, spectacle, or overt intervention. Even the Empress Dowager, who occasionally inspected palace routines, noted nothing amiss. Princess Yang remained mildly curious but non-interventionist. Ministers continued to speculate on causes for the emperor's calm behavior, attributing improvements to philosophy, diet, or temperament rather than subtle comfort management. The Pillow Bureau, the Court Nap Masters, and Scholar Liang maintained the quiet systems that underpin these outcomes, documenting, observing, and refining each element with precision and patience. In the Han Palace, as elsewhere, small, consistent interventions often yielded more enduring effects than dramatic or overt actions. The afternoon repose, supported by layered pillows, jade neck rolls, carefully calibrated fabrics, and gentle environmental adjustments, exemplified this principle. Through attentive observation, meticulous craftsmanship, and subtle intervention, the palace maintained equilibrium, calm, and restorative rest, a quiet, largely invisible system that shaped minor behaviors and stabilized court dynamics in ways no public record could reveal. Thus, the emperor's afternoon repose, while seemingly trivial, became a cornerstone of palace stability. Each element, from pillow alignment to jade neckroll placement, from temperature control to aromatic balance, was observed, adjusted, and refined. The pillow bureau, scholar Liang, and the court nap masters ensured continuity, consistency, and comfort, creating a delicate equilibrium that preserved both personal well-being and institutional calm. In sum, the emperor rested, the palace stabilized, and subtle influence thrived, unseen, gentle, and quietly transformative. Chapter 11. The unremarkable brilliance of nighttime pillow rotation. As we move deeper into the subtle mechanics of the Han court, we arrive at a practice so quietly significant that it almost goes unnoticed: nighttime pillow rotation. At first glance, it seems trivial. Who could suspect that gently shifting a pillow a few degrees each night could influence imperial posture, mood, or minor physiological indicators? And yet, for the pillow bureau, this ritual was both a science and an art, executed with precision that rivaled any astronomical observation in its careful measurement and consistency. The principle was simple. A pillow over the course of nightly use compresses in specific areas. Feathers settle, cotton shifts, silk stretches. Left unadjusted, the cumulative effect could subtly influence spinal alignment, neck tension, and even breathing patterns. A minor tilt might go unnoticed by the emperor, but over weeks, small misalignments could translate into micro-discomfort, restless shifting, and slight increases in subtle irritability during court audiences. Rome, ever vigilant, developed a systematic rotation schedule. Each night, pillows were rotated along both horizontal and vertical axes, with the jade neckroll sometimes repositioned to balance the shift in support. Su adjusted the internal stuffing density based on cumulative compression, while Wen ensured that the silk overlay maintained consistent tension. The rotations were not arbitrary. Each axis, degree, and layering sequence was recorded in meticulous bamboo slip logs for reference and comparison. Scholar Liang, naturally, documented the subtle effects of rotation on posture. He noted minor improvements in shoulder symmetry, reduction in eyelid droop asymmetry, and slight increases in consistent breathing patterns. Lu Qingshu and the court nap masters corroborated these observations, recording minute changes in micromovements during rest. The rotation schedule was surprisingly complex. For example, Monday nights, rotate pillow 30 degrees clockwise, reposition jade neckroll 1 centimeter left. Tuesday nights, rotate 45 degrees counterclockwise, adjust stuffing density in upper third. Wednesday nights, maintain rotation but swap herbal sachets to balance aroma and tactile sensation. Thursday nights, rotate 15 degrees clockwise, slightly adjust silk tension. Friday nights, minor recalibration of support layers to account for cumulative feather settling. Each step, while subtle, ensured that pillows remained optimally supportive, the emperor's posture remained aligned, and minor microtensions were corrected before they could accumulate into noticeable discomfort. Apprentices learned quickly that rotation was a serious responsibility. A misplaced pillow might result in a subtle tilt, a slight compression, or an imperceptible imbalance in support. While the emperor would notice nothing overtly, the court nap masters could detect deviations in micromovements, shoulder alignment, or even eyelid patterns. Misalignment triggered a quiet review, and the apprentice responsible would assist in careful correction the following night. The jade neckroll, as we have seen, was sometimes rotated independently of the pillow itself. Minor adjustments to its angle or position allowed subtle correction of cervical alignment. Rong and Su coordinated these rotations carefully, while Wen monitored the tactile interface between fabric and stone, ensuring consistent comfort. Liang, logging every detail, occasionally recommended minor adjustments to rotation degrees based on observed changes in posture or breathing. Even the herbal sachets were part of the rotation protocol. Aromas, jasmine, chrysanthemum, mint, were shifted slightly each night to prevent olfactory habituation and maintain subtle calming effects. Though minor, these rotations were documented and correlated with sleep quality metrics observed by the court nap masters. One particularly illustrative week involved a minor miscalculation by an apprentice. The upper pillow layer was rotated incorrectly, resulting in a slight shift in feather density distribution. Over the course of 3 nights, the court nap masters observed minimal but measurable deviations in neck posture and eyelid symmetry. Rong and Su implemented a series of subtle corrections, adjusted stuffing layers, repositioned the jade neck roll, and recalibrated silk tension. By the 4th night, baseline alignment and comfort were restored, with no noticeable disruption to the emperor's rest. The incident, while minor, reinforced the importance of precise adherence to rotation protocols. Nighttime pillow rotation also served as a preventive measure. By ensuring that support layers were evenly utilized and minor compressions corrected regularly, the pillow bureau minimized cumulative strain on the emperor's neck, shoulders, and spine. This, in turn, reduced minor irritability, improved consistency in microposture indicators, and preserved the subtle equilibrium of palace life. Interestingly, rotation protocols varied seasonally. In winter, when feather density became slightly firmer due to colder temperatures, rotations emphasized subtle adjustments to prevent pressure points. In summer, softer feather expansion required rotations designed to maintain gentle alignment without introducing tilts or sag. Liang, Su, Wen, and Rong worked closely to ensure these seasonal adjustments were smooth, precise, and recorded for future reference. The court nap masters, ever vigilant, noted correlations between rotation fidelity and observed rest quality. Slight deviations in nightly rotation often corresponded to minor asymmetry in shoulder tension, subtle shifts in eyelid closure patterns, or minor micromovements during deep rest. Corrective rotation restored these parameters to baseline, demonstrating the efficacy of patient, measured attention to detail. This quiet orchestration was, in many ways, an invisible form of stability. Ministers, unaware of the nightly rotations, observed improvements in the emperor's calm demeanor, consistent decision-making, and measured patience. Princess Yang remained curious but uninterventionist. The Empress Dowager noted serene audiences without comment, and the emperor, entirely oblivious, benefited from carefully maintained alignment, subtle comfort, and minor olfactory cues that reinforced relaxation and restorative rest. The rivalries among artisans, previously gentle, also played a role here. Each had slight preferences for rotation angles, stuffing adjustments, and silk tension. Rong emphasized consistency, Su focused on contour correction, and Wen prioritized tactile smoothness. Their subtle negotiation produced optimal outcomes, rotation protocols that were precise, replicable, and minimally intrusive. Apprentices observed these dynamics carefully, learning that even quiet competition could improve craftsmanship without creating discord. Even minor environmental factors were incorporated into rotation decisions. The direction of moonlight, ambient temperature, airflow, and seasonal humidity were subtly considered. A slight change in angle could prevent drafts from affecting the emperor's posture. Minor lighting variations were offset by careful positioning of silk layers. Even the rotation of herbal sachets contributed, as the faint, changing aromas interacted with ambient conditions to support subtle relaxation. By the time rotation protocols were fully integrated, they represented one of the most sophisticated forms of subtle influence within the Han Palace. They were not political. They were not coercive. They were merely meticulous, careful, and informed by patient observation. Yet their cumulative effect, improved posture, steady eyelid closure, calmer micromovements, reduced shoulder tension, was measurable, subtly stabilizing the emperor's demeanor and, by extension, palace interactions. In the quiet of night, as the palace rested, these rotations occurred methodically. Pillows were shifted, stuffed layers adjusted, silk tension checked, the jade neck roll repositioned, and herbal sachets moved. Lu Qingshu and the court nap masters observed, logged, and noted outcomes. Scholar Liang documented subtleties and deviations. Rong, Su, and Wen executed the process with calm precision. Apprentices assisted, learning the art of subtlety, patience, and attention to detail. Through this nightly ritual, the emperor's rest was preserved, palace equilibrium maintained, and subtle influence exercised in its gentlest form. No one outside the pillow bureau, the court nap masters, or Liang's careful observations understood the complexity of these procedures. Yet their quiet effect permeated court life, producing calm, measured behavior without drama, conflict, or spectacle. Nighttime pillow rotation, then, was more than a minor ritual. It was a quiet art of observation, adjustment, and preventive care, executed with precision, patience, and gentle expertise. It exemplified the Han Palace's capacity for subtle management, illustrating that even the softest, most unassuming objects, pillows, jade neck rolls, silk layers, could carry profound influence when handled with care, attention, and quiet deliberation. The emperor slept, the palace stabilized, and artisans, scholars, and attendants maintained this delicate equilibrium with minimal fanfare, demonstrating that sometimes the greatest power resides not in dramatic action, but in patient, measured, and almost imperceptible attention to the smallest details. Chapter 12. Minor Adjustments, Major Calm, the Art of Fabric Tension. As the pillow bureau continued its subtle orchestration of imperial comfort, another dimension quietly emerged: fabric tension. Most observers, ministers, eunuchs, even Princess Yang, would have dismissed this as an inconsequential detail. And yet, for Rong, Su, Wen, and the apprentices, the precise tension of silk and cotton layers was critical. It influenced how feathers settled, how the jade neck roll interacted with cervical alignment, and even how aromas from herbal sachets dispersed. In essence, it was a silent but measurable contributor to the emperor's calm, steady demeanor. Fabric tension was not about tautness or slack alone. It involved a careful interplay of elasticity, layering, and alignment. Rome described it simply: too tight and the pillow resists adjustment. Too loose and the support collapses unpredictably. Only a balanced tension allows gentle rotation, micro-adjustment, and steady posture. Su and Wen translated this philosophy into action, subtly altering stitching density, layering order, and silk overlay tightness to maintain consistent alignment night after night. The apprentices, naturally, struggled at first. A slightly loose silk layer could produce minor shifts in feather alignment, leading to imperceptible but detectable changes in the emperor's neck posture. A layer that was too tight might produce small pressure points, causing minimal shoulder tension during afternoon repose. These deviations were never disastrous. No one fainted, no ministers rioted, but they were carefully documented, corrected, and logged. Every adjustment was noted for future reference, producing an archive of empirical observations that would eventually rival the bureaucratic records of minor policies in thoroughness. Scholar Liang took a particular interest in fabric tension. He documented correlations between slight adjustments and subtle changes in posture, breathing patterns, eyelid droop, and even minor facial tension. For instance, he noted that when silk overlays were tightened to a particular degree, shoulder microtension decreased marginally. When slightly loosened, breathing patterns improved, though minor eyelid asymmetry increased. These observations, when combined with pillow rotation, stuffing adjustments, and jade neck roll placement, contributed to a multidimensional system of restorative rest. The court nap masters, naturally, appreciated the results. Lu Qingshu recorded that small deviations in fabric tension could influence how the emperor shifted during sleep, how frequently he micro-adjusted posture, and how consistently his shoulders remained aligned. Slightly improper tension, while imperceptible to anyone outside the bureau, resulted in minor shifts in eyelid droop patterns, which they noted with meticulous care. Corrective adjustments restored baseline comfort immediately, demonstrating the quiet power of careful material management. One particularly illustrative incident occurred during a warm summer month. Silk layers had expanded slightly due to humidity, subtly altering the tension of the top pillow layer. The jade neck roll, previously positioned perfectly, interacted differently with the fabric, producing a minor tilt in cervical alignment. Lu Qingshu observed slight shifts in eyelid droop, minor asymmetry in shoulder alignment, and faint micromovements during rest. Rong and Su, noting the deviation, gently adjusted silk tension, repositioned the jade neck roll, and relayered cotton support. When finalized the overlay, ensuring consistent tactile sensation. By morning, the emperor's posture had returned to baseline and no discomfort was apparent. This incident highlights the subtlety and precision required. Fabric tension was not merely a mechanical concern. It interacted with every element of the restorative system. Pillows, neck rolls, layering, stuffing, herbal sachets, rotation schedules, ambient airflow, lighting, and even minor environmental changes all intersected in ways that required attentive observation and careful adjustment. Minor deviations could accumulate subtly over time, producing ripple effects in posture, micro-movements, and minor physiological indicators. The Pillow Bureau approached these adjustments methodically. Each session began with observation, assessing feather compression, silk overlay tautness, and cotton layer alignment. Adjustments were implemented incrementally, with careful monitoring of cumulative effects. Minor deviations were logged, analyzed, and incorporated into rotation and layering schedules. Apprentices observed closely, learning the importance of patience, precision, and subtlety in maintaining equilibrium. Even seasonal shifts required careful attention. In dry winter months, silk layers contracted slightly, necessitating adjustments to preserve consistent tension and prevent pressure points. In humid summer months, expansion required subtle recalibration to maintain alignment. Rong, Su, and Wen, collaborating with Liang's meticulous records, implemented these changes quietly, ensuring that cumulative comfort remained consistent. Herbal sachets were also affected by fabric tension. Tight silk overlays limited the diffusion of aroma, subtly reducing calming effects. Looser layers allowed better diffusion, but risked minor positional shifts in the pillow's structure. Adjustments balanced these factors, ensuring both tactile comfort and gentle aromatic influence. The combination of soft support, stable alignment, and faint fragrance produced a measurable improvement in the emperor's microbehavior, even if invisible to ministers and attendants outside the immediate circle. This subtle orchestration extended to afternoon repose as well. Fabric tension influenced how pillows responded during short naps, how the jade neck roll interacted with the cervical curve, and how micro-movements during brief rest were minimized. Lu Qingshu noted that consistent tension contributed to steadier shoulder alignment, reduced eyelid asymmetry, and minor decreases in facial microtension. Even a slight loosening or tightening produced detectable differences. It is remarkable from a historical perspective that such subtle mechanics were observed, recorded, and refined over time. No minister, eunuch, or princess intervened. The emperor remained entirely unaware. Yet the palace benefited from these minor but cumulative interventions, producing smoother audience interactions, calmer microbehavior, and a gentle stabilization of court life. Rivalries among the Pillow Bureau artisans persisted subtly. Each had preferred tension ranges. Rong emphasized consistency, Su preferred slight contour adjustment, and Wen prioritized tactile smoothness. Their gentle competition encouraged iterative refinement, producing outcomes superior to any single artisan's work. Apprentices absorbed these lessons, learning the quiet art of subtle observation, patient adjustment, and attentive documentation. Even minor environmental factors interacted with fabric tension. Temperature changes, humidity fluctuations, airflow, and lighting all subtly affected how silk and cotton behaved. The Pillow Bureau incorporated these variables into nightly rotation schedules, afternoon repose adjustments, and even meditation support sessions. Each intervention, however minor, contributed to a cumulative effect on posture, micro-movements, eyelid droop, breathing steadiness, and overall calmness. In this way, fabric tension became both a technical concern and a subtle instrument of palace stability. It exemplified the quiet sophistication of the Han Pillow Bureau, demonstrating that careful attention to minor variables, imperceptible to the untrained eye, could stabilize behavior, preserve comfort, and indirectly influence the calm demeanor of the emperor. Through patient observation, careful adjustment, and iterative refinement, the Pillow Bureau maintained equilibrium in the palace. Minor deviations were corrected, cumulative effects monitored, and artifacts like the jade neckroll and layered pillows incorporated seamlessly. The emperor's rest remained restorative, his posture steady, and his microbehavior consistent. Ministers, oblivious to these interventions, observed calm audiences and measured decision-making, unaware that minor fabric tension adjustments contributed quietly to palace stability.